T-minus 10, 9, 8,
The clock is operating. We're underway.
Tranquility Base here.
Endeavor, go and throttle up.
To Chile now, where the miners have been trapped underground for 41 days. Rescuers have bored down 296 meters with the Plan A drill, and crews say the Plan B drill could be back up and running soon. A Plan C rig is nearly 70% assembled, and authorities hope to have that drill ready within a week. Meanwhile, new hope arrives for the trapped miners, especially for one of them. Patrick Ottman is live in Copiapó at the epicenter of the rescue efforts to explain. We have a new addition, Patrick.
We do have a new addition to this ever-growing family of miners. You know, Aisha, it's been so interesting being here, essentially living among their families. You've seen them day-to-day grapple with telling their relatives bad news about a family member being sick, troubles in the family. They just don't want to get their spirits down. But yesterday, they did the best news possible when trapped miner Ariel Tacona and his wife Elizabeth had a baby girl. They're calling her Esperanza, which means hope. Very healthy baby girl, I was told last night by Ariel's sister, born in the hospital in nearby Copiapó. Apparently, Esperanza and her mother, Elizabeth, are still resting at the hospital, but doing very, very well after a cesarean section to have that child delivered. Her father, of course, couldn't be there. He's still trapped 700 meters underground. But over this video conference system that they've set up that allows miners to communicate instantaneously with their families, last night they were able to show him some of the images of his new baby girl. He was reportedly, his sister told me, extremely happy to be a father again. This is his third child, and obviously very sad not to be there, but what a moment it will be when he's finally, hopefully, rescued from this mine, when he's brought up to the earth, and he'll be able to meet his baby girl. Officials say they hope to make that reunion possible within the next several months.
All right, Patrick Ottman there with the very latest from Copiapó.
One of the 33 miners trapped deep underground in Chile has a new baby girl waiting for him on the surface. His daughter's name, appropriately, means hope. That news came as rescue teams tried to get their fastest drill at the site working again. Patrick Ottman joins us now from Copiapó, Chile. Patrick, two pieces of good news. Let's start with the delivery.
And both pieces of news have really sort of sparked a lot of excitement in camp. You're seeing more smiles on people's faces this morning than I think I've seen in all my time here. First piece of news, we believe this is the first child born to a miner in the 40 days of their captivity, 700 meters down to the ground. Baby Hope, born to Elizabeth and Ariel Tacona, born yesterday about noontime, coming in a little less than 4 kilos and about 31 centimeters long, a very healthy baby. I just happened to run into the baby's very proud grandfather, Hector Tacona, as he was walking to the camp. He was the one who broke the news last night to his son that he was a father yet again. You know, the day before Ariel was trapped in this mine, he actually found out that he was going to have a daughter, and he and his wife discussed naming her Carolina. Well, after 17 days, when it was discovered that Ariel and 32 of his colleagues were alive in the mine, beating all odds, they survived the mine collapse, he and his wife began talking. They heard that the area where I am now, Camp Hope, Campo Esperanza, had become this sort of focal point, rallying the miners' spirits, and they decided that would be a great name for their daughter. So they went with Esperanza, and apparently he's being congratulated heartily by all his fellow miners deep in the ground below us.
And her name is so appropriate because today there is a new measure of hope for the miners. There are 3 different teams working with 3 different drill mechanisms to try and get those men out of there. One of those teams, one of those drills, was essentially out of commission. It's coming back?
Absolutely, and it was very much touch and go here, Jonathan. Officials were even speculating that they might have to start drilling in a different hole. This is a type of drill that expands an existing hole, one of the holes that they drill down looking for the miners. it was making it wider, making really great progress, reaching about 260 meters in only a couple days when something terrible happened. It hit an opening in the mine, possibly a support beam, completely shattering the drill bit, and they did what they call a fishing operation. They used something they call a spider to fish out, and this is a metal hand type thing, to fish out this broken drill bit. They didn't know if they could get it. Yesterday they said that it's been successful. As soon as they get a replacement bit, they'll start drilling again. Very good news for the miners. And then as well, that Plan C oil drilling platform on the other side of camp that's slowly going up. They hope to begin drilling there within less than a week. And for the first time, they'll have all 3 drills going to rescue these miners.
Patrick Ottman live from Copiapó, Chile. Thanks very much. And we'll be back with more of The Brief right after this.
48 Zentimeter groß, wiegt 3500 Gramm und heißt Esperanza, zu Deutsch eben Hoffnung. Einer der Bergmänner ist nämlich Vater geworden. Auch wenn er nicht dabei sein konnte, freut sich der stolze Vater in 700 Metern Tiefe über die Geburt des kleinen Mädchens.
Ihr Name ist Esperanza, auf Deutsch Hoffnung. Wohl kaum ein anderer Name wäre in diesem Fall passender gewesen. Der Vater der kleinen Esperanza ist Ariel Ticona, einer der 33 verschütteten Bergarbeiter in Chile. Die Schwägerin des Bergmanns hielt Esperanzas Geburt auf Fotos fest, wie hier zusammen mit der glücklichen Mama und in einem Video. Das Video soll jetzt dem frisch gebackenen Papa und seinen verschütteten Kumpels in 700 Meter Tiefe geschickt werden. Die Oma von Esperanza hat gemischte Gefühle. Es ist ein bisschen traurig, weil mein Sohn bei der Geburt seiner Tochter nicht dabei sein konnte. Ich hätte es ihm so gewünscht, aber er kann ja nicht. Das Video wird ihn glücklich machen. Seit 40 Tagen ist Ariel Ticona bereits in der Mine eingeschlossen. Seine kleine Tochter wurde nach dem Lager benannt, in dem die Angehörigen der Bergleute ausharren und die Rettungsarbeiten verfolgen. Camp Esperanza, also Camp Hoffnung. Ariel Ticona muss vermutlich noch bis Weihnachten warten, bis er gerettet wird und seine Esperanza endlich in den Armen halten kann.
Gleich 2 Ereignisse gefeiert. Der 200. Jahrestag der Unabhängigkeit und der erste große Erfolg bei den Rettungsarbeiten für die verschütteten Bergleute. Ein Bohrer ist bis zu den 33 Männern vorgedrungen. Jetzt gibt es Hoffnung, dass die Bergleute schneller als erwartet gerettet werden können.
Die Hoffnung ist seit heute 30 Zentimeter breit. 630 Meter Gestein hat der Bohrkopf durchbrochen, als er die Männer in der Tiefe erreicht. Es ist Tag 43 nach dem Unglück. So greifbar war der Kontakt zur Oberwelt noch nie. Ganz Chile soll wissen, dass es uns gut geht. Wir sind total begeistert und können kaum fassen, was heute erreicht wurde. Vielen Dank. Es lebe Chile. Das Land, das gebannt auf das Drama in der Atacama-Wüste blickt, kann nun hoffen, dass die Rettung schneller geht als geplant. Die 33 Männer halten sich in einem Schutzraum auf, der nicht verschüttet wurde. Von dort geht es in einen Werkzeugraum, zu dem der Schacht führt, der seit heute 30 Zentimeter breit ist. Die nächste Bohrung soll ihn doppelt so breit machen, dann passen die Männer durch. Wie lange diese Bohrung dauert, können wir noch nicht sagen. Im Moment gehen wir von 30 bis 40 Tagen aus. Aber das hängt davon ab, ob wir in dem Gestein, durch das wir durch müssen, auf Probleme stoßen. Am Abend erreicht das Video mit dem Jubel aus der Tiefe auch die Angehörigen. Ich habe Angst und bin ungeduldig, aber es ist wichtig, dass wir jetzt ruhig bleiben. Denn wenn wir verzweifeln, dann überträgt sich das auch auf die Männer da unten. Mit dem Durchbruch von heute sind die Chancen gestiegen, dass die Bergleute Weihnachten nun doch über Tage feiern können.
This trip protests the Pope coalition of groups forming the biggest protest of this visit so far, when earlier today in London around 5,000 of them gathered to give voice to their objections to this trip. They described the Pope as an enemy of the state and of women and gay rights. Around 5,000 of them there. And around, the organisers say, 80,000 at this vigil in Hyde Park tonight. Joining me now is Father Christopher Jameson. He's director of the Catholic Church's National Office for Vocation. He's an author and a Benedictine monk who featured in BBC Television's The Monastery. Father Christopher, thank you very much for joining us here again.
It's a joy to be here with the crowds. We can hear the joy already.
There's certainly a huge deal of excitement. You can feel that coming from the crowd, the sense of anticipation.
And this lovely segue of the priests singing, moving us from the sort of youth festival atmosphere we had this afternoon into the more solemn part of the evening celebration, which will be the vigil with the Holy Father.
Yes, just talk to us about the meaning of the vigil, will you please?
Well, a vigil is obviously something that happens the evening before a great event. It means to prepare yourself for a feast day the following day, and that's what we're doing now. We're starting to prepare for the beatification of John Henry Newman, and so this vigil, the Holy Father will prepare himself and the Church for that great and solemn act.
We continue to watch that procession coming towards us. I'd like your thoughts on the significance of the meeting with the victims of clerical sex abuse earlier, and the fact that the Pope described the actions of paedophile priests as an unspeakable crime.
Yes, this was a change in tone to refer to crimes, and I think shows the continuing determination by the Pope to make it clear that he takes this profoundly seriously, and that the meetings that he has with the victims are not just a matter of form, but in fact something which he does in a way which profoundly moves him, and he really wants to do it to go out to embrace those who have been so deeply wounded by what he quite rightly called crimes. And he's done it everywhere he's been now, and it must be such a burden to those who have had those experiences to come and talk to them about it. And so we greatly admire them having the courage really to come and revisit their experiences in that way.
We'll just pause in our conversation for a moment, Father Christopher, as we look at these images live of the Mall down towards Buckingham Palace. It's certainly a spectacular image, and with the flags of the Vatican and the Union flag, of course, along the route, it emphasizes the state nature of this visit. And I believe we can now talk to our correspondent, Daniela Ralph, who is along the Mall, among the crowds. Daniela, give us a flavor of the atmosphere there.
Well, Anita, this is the moment, of course, these crowds have been waiting for. Many of them have been lining up the route of the Mall here, lining up here for 5 or 6 hours. The Mall itself, dressed for a state occasion, the Union flag, the papal standard, alongside each other here. And the crowd just getting a sense that the Pope-mobile now at the very bottom end of the Mall, near Admiralty Arch, heading up towards Buckingham Palace. A huge sense of excitement for many people here. Lots of them don't have tickets for the event at Hyde Park, so this will be their one and only chance really to see the Pope, and it is an extremely close vantage point that they're going to have as well, lined up along the streets here. The route up to you at Hyde Park will be up the Mall, around Buckingham Palace, around the Queen Victoria Monument here, up Constitution Hill, across Hyde Park Corner and into the park itself. And understandably, the Pope-mobile is going at a pretty sedate rate so that everybody here can get a good look at Pope Benedict. The Pope-mobile itself, of course, is a converted Mercedes, so it could go at 160 miles an hour, we're told, but here today we're seeing it travel at maybe just around 6 miles an hour, walking pace really, as the Pope-mobile with the police outriders are now just ahead of it, coming up towards Buckingham Palace at a very, very slow rate. And for many of the people that we have been talking to today, they just said that they had come here to see the Pope because they felt they wanted to be a part of history. There are a huge number of families that have chosen to come to this event here as well. I think it's early evening, it's a good time for some of the younger children to be out. They get a chance to see the Pope very closely, and I think for them, they just felt it was their chance to take part in a major event, and something that they wanted their children to take part in as well. So very much a celebratory atmosphere here in central London. There is, though, of course, as you would expect, a huge amount of security too. Metropolitan police officers lining the route, the barriers keeping the crowds back. This is, of course, a journey that takes in many important buildings, many government buildings, and 3 royal residences. Popemobile going past Clarence House, now going past St James's Palace, and heading up towards Buckingham Palace. So unquestionably a huge amount of security surrounding this particular section of the journey, but this is an extremely good chance for the crowd to get a good look at the Pope as he heads up to you in Hyde Park, Anita.
Daniela, obviously a lot of security there surrounding the Pope.
Yes, there is, just because the nature of the route he's taking, really. There are police outriders at every corner. There are Metropolitan police officers lining the route at maybe every 5 meters or so. There are also police officers on the roof, many of the buildings around here, Buckingham Palace and St James's. It's secured very tightly, this particular section of the Pope's journey through London, and also because this is really the best chance we have had to see the Pope and the Popemobile together. We did see the Popemobile yesterday for a little bit at Westminster, a very short journey that time, but this really is the main Popemobile route through London, the main chance that people here will get to see the Pope in the Popemobile. Heading up now towards Buckingham Palace. Very shortly the Popemobile will be heading around the Queen Victoria Monument. The Pope trying to wave to both sides of the crowd, of course, as he comes by. There'd been a lot of uncertainty about exactly which route he would take around the palace. But once that was sorted, everyone took up their positions. The papal flags waving, and people, a round of applause for Pope Benedict as he comes past us now, directly in front of Buckingham Palace, waving to the crowds. Many, as I say, who have been waiting here for 5 or 6 hours for this one moment to see Pope Benedict. We're told the Popemobile travelling at around 6 to 10 miles an hour. That feels about right, walking alongside it. And a moment of history, how many had described to us it was for them today.
It's difficult, Daniela. Daniela, sorry for interrupting you. It's difficult, given the nature of the route, the long snaking nature of the route, to determine exactly how many people are there, but it's clearly many thousands.
Yes, it is definitely many thousands, and many who've made a day out of it as well, who've been here early, who've wanted to get a good vantage point, but definitely many thousands lining the route all along the Mall, and now up Constitution Hill along the side of Buckingham Palace and Green Park, up to Hyde Park Corner and to Hyde Park to you. But definitely thousands of people here, and many, many families with young children who've come out to be part of this today.
Okay, Daniela, thank you very much. Daniela Ralph reporting there from amongst the crowds of people lined along the Mall in central London to catch this glimpse of the Pope. His third trip in the Popemobile, I believe, for this visit in Edinburgh, on his way from Lambeth Palace, the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury, through to Westminster Hall yesterday, and now this trip to Hyde Park. And It must be a very heartening sight, Father Christopher Jameson, who's still with me. It must be a very heartening sight for the Pope and his entourage to see these many thousands of people who've turned out, because obviously the UK is a pretty secular country.
Absolutely, and the Pope's entourage have been telling us that the Holy Father is really overwhelmed by the warmth of the visit, because some people had been saying, this is going to be so difficult. It's probably the most difficult country for a Pope to visit for historical reasons, the most difficult country for a Pope to visit because of its secularization. And so there was an anxiety, but I think the people of Britain, and I'd say that globally, not just the Church, the people of Britain have demonstrated a tremendous warmth towards the Holy Father and a tremendous affirmation of his presence among us, which was symbolized for me most beautifully by the welcome of the parliamentarians and the civil society leaders in Westminster Hall, which was an event of extraordinary historical significance, but also one where the Pope said some demanding things for civil leaders to hear, but which they welcomed very warmly with their applause at the end. And here again on the streets, we're seeing the people of Britain themselves expressing their affirmation. I was very struck in Scotland that at the end of the Pope's stay in Scotland, Alex Salmond was very proudly proclaiming this has been a great day for Scotland, not just for the Pope or for the Church. And I think the same is true today here in England. Here we are in Hyde Park, and seeing the crowds on the streets too, that this is a great day for England, a great day for the United Kingdom.
In Scotland, the Pope talked about those in society who wish to privatise religion. I think today, certainly in Glasgow at Bellahouston Park, today and tomorrow in Cofton Park in Birmingham, we're going to see a very public affirmation of religion.
You're looking at a website from the Canadian Space Agency. Well, on Monday, they launched an online observatory so everybody can check out the aurora lights. It's going to be streaming live over the internet. This is so cool because you think about it, so many people don't live far enough north. They don't have the right weather conditions to check this out. Well, they launched this to coincide when actually we start to see a peak in the aurora lights, and the aurora season that usually begins in late August and early September and ends in May. How cool is that? They're expecting it to peak in 2013, the aurora borealis lights.
Glauben Sie an Außerirdische?
Nein, nein.
Wir glauben nicht.
Nein. Absolut. Ich glaube, dass es irgendwo Leben gibt, aber nicht in dieser Form, wie wir es hier auf der Erde haben.
Ich glaube an einem Lebewesen im Weltall, aber nicht an Aliens. Nicht so, wie es im Film dargestellt wird, aber Leben im All wird es schon geben.
Direkt an Außerirdische, also die fliegenden Untertassen und so weiter, da glaube ich eigentlich nicht mehr dran.
Könnten so aussehen wie wir, die könnten ganz anders aussehen oder nicht begleitet sein oder weiß ich.
Sinnesorgane, genauso wie wir werden die haben.
Weil ich es für unwahrscheinlich halte, dass es hier in unserer Nähe Außerirdische gibt. Dass es vielleicht irgendwo in irgendwelchen Sonnensystemen irgendwelche Formen von Leben gibt, schon. Aber nicht im Sinne dieser Aliens.
Es ist eigentlich abzuwarten, ne?
Also wenn es Aliens gibt, dann sind die fortschrittlicher als wir.
Sie lachen.
Wunderbar.
Sie lachen, warum?
Wenn es Aliens gibt, dann müssen die fortschrittlicher sein. Warum? Ich meine, uns Menschen gibt es seit, sagen wir mal, grob 500.000 Jahren. Ja. Und wenn die anderen eben noch ein bisschen jünger sind, dann sind die noch nicht so weit wie wir.
Glauben Sie, dass die da draußen sind, nett sind? Dass sie es gut mit uns meinen?
Die kennen uns ja noch nicht. Ja, wir kennen die auch nicht. Man kann vielleicht Folgendes sagen, wenn man mal wirklich annimmt, der kosmische Normalfall, gibt es diejenigen, die sind interessiert an den anderen Planeten, die wollen was entdecken. Und dann gibt es die Entdeckten. Und wir können nun aus unserer eigenen Geschichte ja mal nachgucken, wer hat denn gewonnen? Die Entdecker oder die Entdeckten? Meistens haben die Entdeckten den Kürzeren gezogen. Also man weiß nicht immer, ob man sich wünschen soll, von Außerirdischen entdeckt zu werden. Denn wenn die so sind wie wir, dann ist es vielleicht besser, nicht entdeckt zu werden.
Das, und dann ist es vielleicht auch besser, wenn wir lieber zu den Entdeckern gehören und rausgehen und schauen, was da draußen noch ist, um dann zu überleben.
Ja.
Jetzt schreiben Sie in diesem Ihren Buch auch in Kapiteln von einem galaktischen Gerülpse, Meine Semmel und ich und Sex im Weltall.
Ja.
Wie kommen Sie da drauf? Wird auch gegessen, getrunken und
geliebt? Das kommt alles letztlich dadurch zustande, man fragt sich halt, wie ist denn das Leben so im Weltall? Also das alltägliche Leben. Man fliegt dahin und dann ist man dann da oben. Oben herrscht Schwerelosigkeit. Und das ist sehr unerfreulich. Also zum Beispiel die Aufnahme eines schönen Glases Bier. Schönes, helles, frisch gezapft, schön mit
Schaum.
Ja, so. Und hier auf der Erde sinkt die Flüssigkeit nach unten und die Kohlensäure dringt wieder durch den Mund nach oben. Das geht da aber nicht. So, und dann bleibt das da drin. Es muss aber irgendwo raus. Und wo geht's raus? Genau. auf der anderen Seite. Und das ist zum Beispiel so eine Geschichte, oder die Vorstellung, man würde also morgens schön eine Semmel aufschneiden. Ja, das ist hier auf der Erde, fallen die Krümel einfach nach unten, die Schwerkraft der Erde. Dort oben würde das Aufschneiden einer Semmel dazu führen, dass die Krümel sich naturgemäß irgendwo hinter der Platine von irgendeinem Schaltschrank verstecken würden, weil das läuft, oder noch besser, ein Ei, 4,5 Minuten, also so schön pflaumenweich, schlägt man auf und dann schlappert das Eiweiß durch die Schwerelosigkeit da irgendwo in dem Raumschiff rum.
Kann man hinterher zuzeln.
Also es ist kein leichtes Leben. Von Sex wollen wir jetzt gar nicht reden, wir sind ja noch vor.
Wir wollen es auch ernsthaft behandeln,
Ja.
vielleicht noch zum Schluss. Was tun? Wie soll man sich verhalten, wenn tatsächlich man eines Tages einem Außerirdischen gegenübersteht? Was machen wir?
Ich wäre sehr zurückhaltend, denn die Leute haben viel hinter sich. Man muss ja unter anderem mal schlicht feststellen, die haben sich ja teilweise, wenn diese UFO-Sichtungen stimmen würden, was sie nicht tun, aber nehmen wir an, sie würden stimmen, dann haben sie es mit Menschen oder mit existenten Lebewesen zu tun, die sehr lange in rotierenden Scheiben waren. Und wenn man sehr lange auf dem Kettenkarussell war, das weiß man noch von früher, wie ist das so und welche Farbe haben die Männchen meistens?
Grün.
Ja, warum? Naja, da haben wir es doch. Damit sind wir eigentlich da.
Professor Martin Rees, welcome to Hard Talk.
Good to be here.
Can I start with that rhetorical question from the top? Do scientists have a duty to be useful?
I think in a broad sense they do. They have a duty to help the public and politicians to understand the science which is needed to organize our lives and make political decisions. But they have to also use their skills to try and understand nature and explain nature to the public, because after all, science and nature should be part of our culture, indeed part of the world's culture.
But when you refer to the unstoppable spirit of inquiry, that has to be a spirit that is channeled to some sort of pragmatic, practical, useful purpose.
Well, to some extent, but of course it's well known that many of the inventions which have proved very important have started off through efforts motivated by curiosity. So I think experience has told us that in practice it's good to allow some people to explore what takes their fancy, as it were, what they believe are timely, because without that we will not end up with the practical application. So I think there needs to be a balance. There need to be some people, mainly in our universities, who are exploring what seem to them the biggest intellectual challenges, but also, of course, there need to be large numbers of people who are channeling those discoveries towards the welfare of humans.
Well, that leads me rather neatly to what has taken your fancy for many, many years now, which is astrophysics, and considering some of the biggest questions about the mechanics of our known universe, how it works, and how it came into being. We've just seen Stephen Hawking publish a new book, The Grand Design. In it, an assertion that has captured the imagination of many people, and I'm quoting from it, "It is unnecessary," he now writes, "to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going." In other words, he's found, he thinks, an explanation of how it all came to be.
Well, Steve's an amazing character who I've known for 40 years, and everything he says attracts attention, and he's written a very fine book that describes what many people have discovered in the last 20 years. But frankly, he's read very little philosophy and even less theology, so I don't think we should attach much weight to what he says on those topics.
Well, before we get to the philosophy and theology, he does say M theory, and I'm not going to pretend I know what M theory is, and maybe you can help me. M theory is the unified theory that Einstein was hoping to find.
Well, it may be. If we look at the history of science, previously unrelated things. Newton showed that the force that makes the apple fall is the same as the force that makes the moon stay in its orbit, and then Maxwell unified electricity and magnetism, etc. And the final step would be to have a theory that unifies all the basic forces of nature. And this is one of the main quests of science.
And M theory, which as I understand it, relies heavily upon string theory, so we go from theory to theory, but it's a way of explaining that first sort of trillionth of a second when the universe or universes came into being.
Well, it's a way of unifying the force of gravity with the other forces of nature, unifying the very large and the very small. Whether it has achieved this aim is unclear. Many people have worked on it in the last 20 years. Ed Witten at Princeton is the great guru in this subject. He's the world leader, and it's been a focus of interest in the last 15 years. Whether it'll be the right theory or not, we just don't know. It's entirely speculative at the moment, but it's one of the ideas people are exploring in the hope that it may pan out. But as you say, until we have a theory, whether it's that one or another one, which does unify the very large and the very small, then the very early stages of the universe will be a mystery to us, because we have a theory of atoms, we have a theory of gravity in the cosmos, but when, as it were, the whole universe was the size of a single atom, we need a theory that unifies them.
But
we don't have that theory.
Do you believe and this is partly a question of whether it's worth striving for it, do you believe we can reach a point where there is some sort of equation which people will say, ah yes, that proves how the universe, how everything came to be?
Well, I think it's possible, although not certain, that there will be a theory that unifies the forces, and that'll be the end of a certain scientific quest. But it won't be the end of science. It won't answer philosophical questions, and in particular, it will make zero difference to 99% of scientists, because most scientists are focusing not on issues like that, but on very complicated issues in the environment, in biology, etc. So it'll be the end of one part of science, but irrelevant to most of science.
Well, that's a fascinating thing you just said. If it'll make zero difference to most scientists, leave alone the general public, there is this one big question. What is the point?
Well, because I think everyone would agree that it is a fundamental question, and just as it was very important to show that electricity and magnetism were essentially the same force, that led to electric motors and dynamos and much of modern society. So when we have a theory that tells us how the force of gravity relates to the other forces, it will have lots of other potential consequences. So that's just an example of how, when we are doing science, we start off with the generic basic ideas, and then they have many, many applications. That's true of all of science. To take another slightly less global example, the people who invented the laser were motivated by curiosity. They had no idea whatever that would be used for DVD discs and eye surgery, for instance. So all science starts off with people exploring the laws of nature at the limit without knowing what's going to come out, but then the applications come later.
But a final point on this, and this comes back to something you said very early on in your discussion of Stephen Hawking, where you said, frankly, you didn't hold much store by his talk of God. But faith is important here, isn't it? Because, for example, if one is positing that there are multiple universes, as many, and I think you do, and many scientists now do, well, by definition, if there are multiple universes, aside from our own, then we can't know of them, because if we knew of them, they'd be in our universe. So to believe in that theory is, in essence, always going to be a leap of faith.
No, this is getting rather arcane for our audience, but just to say a word about it, we don't understand the very early Big Bang. When we do understand it a lot better, as I hope we might learn whether it was unique or whether there were other ones. And although we can't directly observe the other Big Bangs, it's not the case that you have to be able to test all consequences of a scientific theory. A theory gains credibility if it explains some things, and then if it explains some things, you take seriously any other predictions it makes. And we may get to a stage when we have a theory which explains many things that we so far are mystified by. And
so it
which
would
does
not rely upon faith at all?
No, no.
And that is, in your view, the difference between science and religion, I suppose. You would reach a point where you'd say your belief is not resting at all on something unprovable.
Well, I think scientists obviously have some ideas which they're confident about. There are some theories they work on which are still tentative, not very well confirmed, and are speculative, but they only become real science when there is some test, some way of testing them against experiment or observation. So I think there's a complete disjunction between the kind of faith which religions talk about and the kind of faith which a scientist may have when he says he hopes his ideas will work out.
Do you agree with the chief rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, when he says that for all of the focus on how the universe came to be, on the how of it, science can never provide the why of it?
I certainly agree with him on that, but whether anyone else can provide the why is the difficult question.
And that's where it goes from science to philosophy,
yes,
I suppose.
Yes.
All right, let's take your own work one step further, and that is to consider your long sort of consideration of space and man's role in the exploration of space. It seems to me you, in some ways, have lost enthusiasm for manned space travel. Is that true?
Well, I have lost enthusiasm for manned space travel as anything other than an adventure. Of course, it was wonderful when people landed on the moon, And it is wonderful what space activities have done, not just for science, but for practical life. I mean, navigation, GPS, monitoring the environment, telecommunications, etc., and for science. But I feel that as robotics and miniaturization advance, the practical case for sending people into space is getting weaker. So I think...
So it shouldn't happen. I mean, well, nobody's going to stump up the money, which is hundreds of billions of dollars, to even contemplate going to Mars or beyond on the basis of just wanting an adventure.
Well, I agree. And if I was an American, I would not support the manned space program, although I would hope that at some stage the cost will come down to the extent when it can be funded by private enterprise or adventurers. That may happen one day. There are quite serious people who are talking about sending people into orbit, privately funded, and the outcome of that may lead to people going further, but I think that should be an adventure. It's not something which I would support for any practical reason.
Really? What about the most practical reason of all, in a Darwinian sense, that it may be necessary for the survival of humanity as a species? I mean, you have, I think, asked serious questions of yourself and the general public about whether, over the next century or two, man is capable of ensuring his own survival on this planet. And if the answer is possibly no, is it not necessary to consider the need to move away from this planet to ensure our survival?
Well, I wouldn't say necessary. I think if we think on a time scale of millions and billions of years in the future, then I imagine the humans or post-human species may well get beyond the Earth. But I think it's rather dangerous to see out in space the answer to any of the Earth's problems. After all, there's nowhere in space which is as hospitable as the South Pole or the top of Everest. So I think to regard going into space as a solution to any of the Earth's problems is a rather dangerous heresy, to be honest.
You talk about the hospitability of the planet, and you have, certainly in your role as President of the Royal Society, made a lot of noise about your concern with the impact of emissions and therefore the impact of climate change on the planet.
Yes.
Does it disappoint you greatly that the message of scientists such as yourself appears to be being ignored by the politicians?
Well, just two gloss on that. I think the public obviously doesn't all take it on board, but given that 40% don't believe in evolution, although the evidence is staring them in the face, I'm not surprised that many people are skeptical about the claims about the threat of climate change, where the arguments are less straightforward and more complex.
Well,
but politicians
not least because there are some real issues about the credibility of some of the science.
Well, I mean, there have been highly publicized cases of errors in, for instance, the IPCC 3,000-page report, but I don't think anyone doubts that the world is warming and that the rise in carbon dioxide will cause warming.
You mean anyone in the scientific community? Because clearly people in the general public do doubt
well, as I say,
that. Polls suggest they doubt it more than they did perhaps even 18 months or 2 years
just
ago.
as 40% doubt evolution, I suspect about 40% doubt the reality of climate change and the real threat. But the science, of course, is in any case uncertain. And what I would say about the science is that we know the carbon dioxide is rising and that will create a warming effect. How great the warming effect is a matter of uncertainty. Business as usual may lead to only 2 degrees rise by the end of the century. It may lead to 5 or more, and the latter would be really catastrophic and lead to irreversible effects.
I just wonder whether you believe that some of the confusion we've seen and some of the problems that have emerged with some limited parts of the science have come because some scientists can't quite decide whether they are scientists, completely impartial, independent, guided only by data, or whether they're campaigners. And I just want to quote to you the words of Ralph Cicerone, the president of the US National Academies of Science, who said at a conference you were at not so very long ago, he said, "The appearance, if not the reality, of a rift within the research community has corroded the climate debate in a way which may actually spread to other kinds of science as well."
Well, I think we should be mindful of that threat. I think in the case of climate change that there's a general acceptance, and certainly most of our political leaders retain the view that it is a serious concern, and nothing that's happened in the last year weakens the evidence. But of course, even if there was no disagreement at all about the science, then as to what we should do about it, there is tremendous scope for debate, because we have to decide what sacrifices we make now in order to guard against risk of uncertain magnitude in the future? Do we expect that new technology will provide a fix, or what do we do about it? So tremendous uncertainty, and it's a very hard case to argue politically, because it's not only a concern in the very remote future, but also it's something which has to be tackled internationally. The effects of the carbon emissions in this country won't primarily affect us, they'll have a worse effect elsewhere.
Would you go so far as George Monbiot, who clearly is not a scientist, he's a campaigner on that side of the fence, he says now that the Copenhagen process to find a global emissions reduction plan has failed, and what he calls the climate change enlightenment is dead. Would you go that far?
I wouldn't. I've just written this week a paper with my friend Tony Giddens, which will appear in many papers around the world, expressing the concerns that George Monbiot is expressing, but therefore that the world does need to reinvigorate the debate. Clearly, Copenhagen was something of a disappointment, though it achieved something. But we do need to reinvigorate the debate.
But how do you as a scientist do that? Because I've already referred to your commitment to being independent and following the data rather than becoming a straight-out campaigner. So how do you as a senior scientist play a role there?
Well, I think it's very important to separate out the science, which is the basis of the policy decisions, from the policy decisions. And as a scientist, I see it as my job, and the job of the scientific academies, to make sure that the science, as we best understand it, with all its uncertainties, is made available to politicians. But as citizens, I think we want to make sure that issues which are long-term and important don't always get trumped by the urgent and immediate.
But
and
they do.
Well, they do, and that's a natural political tendency, and I think scientists probably are the people who ought to urge that the long-term issues don't drift too far down the agenda.
So scientists need to get noisier, do they?
I think they, not just scientists, but I think many people who are concerned about the long-term future of the environment and the climate need to urge our politicians to give some weight to long-term issues. We do sometimes. We worry about pensions 50 years from now, etc., but we need to worry about the environment, population problems, and climate change. And we've got to do this as citizens. And clearly, scientists themselves don't determine the policy, but I think they need to ensure that the debate does take full account of the potential seriousness of all these threats.
When you talk about the pressures, the immediate sort of pressures that politicians face, of course, one's mindful at the moment that the most immediate pressure many of them face is that of quote-unquote austerity, public finances across the world being in a terrible mess, governments having to slash public spending and tighten belts, not least in the higher education sector, amongst those, for example, in your profession, in science labs and research labs and things like that. Do you believe there is now a feeling abroad that science ought to pay its way in a more practical sense than it has before?
Well, I would say it does pay its way. If you look at all the innovations that we depend on now, they can all be traced back to science often done by academics in universities. And I would hope that despite the austerity that we are confronting, science will be seen as an investment and seen as something which is a prerequisite for the high rate of high-tech-led growth that we expect.
Well, you talk
and in
about
this country in particular...
But you talk about high-tech-led growth.
Yes,
I mean, frankly, one doesn't need the ivory tower university to produce the latest breakthroughs in mobile phone technology or internet and digital access. I mean, these things happen because of commercial and competitive pressures.
No, they trace back to what was done in university labs just a very few years ago. I think you're quite wrong about that. And the reason why the high-tech industries are concentrated around major universities is because there is a valuable symbiosis. And we in this country are fortunate to be the country which is number 2 to the US alone in terms of our strong universities.
But in a sense,
and we ought to exploit this.
If I may, I think you're sort of making my point for me, because yes, there's more symbiosis between the private sector and universities, but that suggests that higher education and the top universities are having to evolve in a somewhat different way. They are having to, for example, charge student fees for a start, but they're also having to indulge in research and focus on research which has commercial potential, which can attract sponsors, which can attract endowments, and that is a different approach to higher education than perhaps the one we saw 40, 30 years ago.
No, I think science at the initial level is a public good. It's only when it gets beyond the pre-competitive stage that we expect the private sector to fund it. And if you ask most industrialists, they will say the job of the universities is not to do what they should be doing themselves, but to do the pre-competitive research, the academic or pure research, if you like, and maintain strong universities with capable professors plugged into the world science who can therefore teach students and get them up to the frontiers. That's what the business community wants from our university.
In a word, you don't fear the privatization of higher learning, higher education?
Well, I think we want more supplementary funding from the private sector, and we're getting it, and we want closer symbiosis. We want more people in universities to engage with the commercial sector as well. But I think the developments in that direction are happening already. But the important point is that that doesn't eliminate the need for some kind of academic activity which is not directly marketable, whether it's Stephen Hawking or anything else.
Well, you brought us back to Hawking. I want to end with a big thought, a different sort of big thought. Here's a quote from another physicist, Russell Stannard. He says, "I think there's going to come a time when our descendants have discovered everything about the world that is open for us to understand. There won't be a triumphal end when everybody says, okay, that's it, we've wrapped it up, we know everything. I think science," he says, "will go out with a whimper rather than a bang." Are we close to that limit of what we can know?
Well, that's pessimistic, but can I plug my next book, which is called What We Still Don't Know, which addresses some of these issues. I think as science advances, it's like a frontier, but as it advances, the periphery gets longer and more new questions come into focus. In my own field, I'm addressing questions now that couldn't even have been posed 30 years ago. The questions we were addressing then when I was a student have now been solved. So science is advancing, and the frontiers are the very small, that's particle physics, the very large, the cosmos, and the very complicated, the biological world. So I think there's a tremendous challenge. We're nowhere near the end, we're still at the beginning. But having said that, I think there is a very interesting question about whether we will be able to solve every question, because
do you think we will, if I push you on it?
Well, I think we may not, because I think it's amazing that our brains, which evolved to cope with life on the African savannah a few 100,000 years ago, have been able to understand the mysteries of the cosmos and the quantum. And there may be some theories, there may be some phenomena that our brains just aren't up to.
And you suggest that there's no reason to believe that the human being is the final stage of evolution. But what's perhaps scary about what you then say is the next phase of evolution is to some extent going to be controlled by technology and by us. It's going to be our responsibility how evolution proceeds further. Well, that's somewhat scary if one doesn't altogether have faith in the decency and the goodness of humanity.
It is scary indeed, and I think if we look ahead, then clearly computers and robots are going to have enhanced powers compared to the present, and it'll be possible for evolution to proceed on a far faster timescale and Darwinian natural selection when we understand genetics. And so there is indeed a future where we can't predict, where there are tremendous opportunities, tremendous threats, and that is why we need a well-informed scientific public to make sure that these decisions are made on the basis of better knowledge of the options available to us.
But never mind the scientific public, what about the scientists themselves? I mean, do you believe, it brings us back in a sense to belief, do you believe that scientists, as reflective of human nature, will make the right decisions when it comes to controlling future evolution?
Well, it's not the scientists who make the decisions. It's the public and the politicians advised by science and informed by science who make the decisions. I think if you ask me to give my views, I'm a technical optimist but a political pessimist, in that I believe that science will provide wonderful future opportunities.
A range of options.
It already provides us with more than enough we need to meet the Millennium Goals, which are in the news at the moment. They're not being met for political reasons. And I think the gap between what is possible and what politically happens is getting depressingly wider, and it's a job of scientists and all opinion leaders to ensure that politicians are mindful of the long term.
Martin Rees, we have to leave it there. Thanks for being on Hard Talk.
Erde verzögert sich um mindestens einen Tag. Grund sind nach Angaben des russischen Kontrollzentrums technische Probleme beim Abkoppeln der Sojus-Kapsel. Für die 3 Astronauten bestehe keine Gefahr.
Technischer Probleme verzögert sich die Rückkehr der bemannten Sojus-Kapsel von der internationalen Raumstation ISS. Der Bordcomputer des russischen Raumschiffs hatte ein falsches Signal gegeben. Daraufhin wurde das Abkoppelmanöver abgebrochen. Ein neuer Versuch soll am Samstagmorgen unternommen werden.
The world's most precise clocks to show that clocks do actually run faster if they're raised even by just 12 inches. The phenomenon is called gravitational time dilation, apparently. Well, with me in the studio is Chris Hull, Professor of Theoretical Physics at Imperial College London. Chris, I'm glad you're here. Explain it to us. How does this work?
Okay, it's showing us that time is really quite an extraordinary thing, rather different from our common sense view. Einstein had this beautiful picture of gravitation as a distortion of space and time, and so here we're seeing that associated with the gravitational field, there's a real distortion of time, and this is actually being measured.
Right, so for example, what difference would it make if I lived my life at the top of a skyscraper or the bottom?
Here, in that kind of effect, it would have an effect of just fractions of a second. But these are real effects. If you had a twin who you sent off into space somewhere where there's a very strong gravitational field, perhaps near a black hole, but not too near, so he could come back, then he would come back, and there would be an observable difference in the age. He would be much younger than you.
Right. I mean, that's extraordinary to think of. So what? Many people might say. I mean, what I mean is, what is the application of that? What use is that knowledge to us?
So this actually plays a key role in everyday life, in the global positioning system which we use to pinpoint accurately our position on Earth. That involves sending signals up to satellites and timing the passage of those signals accurately. A small error in the time would have a big effect because the signals travel so fast. And so if this effect wasn't taken into account, the GPS system would get these things wrong by a factor of kilometers. Well, so it's used every day as part of the GPS system.
I have to say, I'm fascinated by the clocks as well. I mean, that a clock could tell that sort of tiny difference, even over a couple of feet. I mean, how do they come up with these things?
Well, that's the big part of this story. I mean, there have been tests of this before. It has been known for some time. But the new part is there's these fantastic new clocks which are measuring these things much more accurately than ever before. The basic idea is it's based on certain atomic processes which happen at certain frequencies which are completely fixed by the nature of the atoms. And because of that, we know precisely the frequency of these. So we can use these as a very, very accurate pendulum. The kinds of oscillations of these atoms are very accurate and precise, and we can use those to time these things very accurately.
Extraordinary. So Chris, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
And that just about brings us to the end of this edition of World News Today. They do say that time flies when you're having fun, don't they?
Die internationalen Raumstation ISS sind am Samstag nach Angaben der russischen Raumfahrtbehörde sicher in Kasachstan gelandet. Ihre Rückkehr zur Erde hatte sich wegen Schwierigkeiten mit der Andockstation um einen Tag verzögert. Die beiden Russen, Skorzow und Kornienko, sowie ihre US-Kollegin Caldwell Dyson hatten sich seit dem 4. April in der Raumstation ISS aufgehalten. Sie waren auch gemeinsam in der russischen Soyuz-Kapsel dorthin gelangt. Am Telefon ist der Raumfahrtexperte Friedhelm Claassen vom Deutschen Zentrum für Luft- und Raumfahrt. Herr Claassen, wie ist denn die Landung jetzt verlaufen?
Ja, zunächst guten Morgen nach Köln. Die Landung ist ganz normal verlaufen, ohne jegliche Probleme. Die drei sind gesund und munter ausgestiegen und haben zur Begrüßung erstmal traditionell Obst bekommen.
Es gab ja zuvor Probleme beim Abdocken. Was ist da schiefgelaufen?
Es ist irgendwas kaputt gegangen. Was genau, weiß man noch nicht. Man hat ein kleines Zahnrad im Verdacht, was das Signal gibt, ob die Systeme dicht voneinander abgetrennt sind. Sie müssen sich das so vorstellen, Sie haben eine Luke auf der Seite der Raumstation, dann haben Sie einen kurzen Tunnel dazwischen und dann haben Sie die Luke der Raumkapsel. Wenn die Astronauten eingestiegen sind in die Kapsel, müssen die Luken geschlossen werden und es muss nachgewiesen werden, dass alles dicht ist. Und auf Seiten der Soyuz-Kapsel hat dieser Nachweis nicht funktioniert, weil ein kleiner elektrischer Schalter nicht betätigt worden ist, wahrscheinlich durch dieses kleine defekte Zahnrad. Man hat das im Verlauf von 24 Stunden weiter analysiert und man hat diesen kleinen elektrischen Schalter dann einfach überbrückt und konnte dann problemlos abkoppeln. Dicht war alles, auch schon beim ersten Mal, sodass nie irgendwo eine Gefahr bestanden hätte. Auch nach dem ersten Versuch sind die Astronauten dann einfach zurück in die Raumstation und man hat das Problem gelöst.
Kommen denn solche, sagen wir mal, kleineren Probleme häufiger vor?
Ja, das ist einfach so ein komplexes System, da ist fast immer irgendeine Kleinigkeit, die aber in der Regel durch redundante, also doppelt vorhandene Systeme völlig problemlos gemeistert werden kann.
Vielen Dank für diese Einschätzungen, Friedhelm Klaassen.
Gerne.
Bei der Bruchlandung eines Airbus A300 sind am Abend in Palermo auf Sizilien rund 30 Menschen leicht verletzt worden. Nach Medienberichten war die Maschine der italienischen Billigfluglinie Windjet im strömenden Regen von der Landebahn abgekommen. Die 123 Passagiere mussten das Flugzeug über Notrutschen verlassen. Die Behörden ordneten eine Untersuchung an. Ja, genau auf solche Fälle wie diesen muss die Feuerwehr am Boden vorbereitet sein. Auf Flugzeugpannen, Bruchlandungen oder auch Brände im Passagierraum. Die Einsatzkräfte müssen blitzschnell reagieren und das muss immer wieder trainiert werden, so wie auch am Abend am Flughafen Leipzig-Halle. Denn im Ernstfall kann jede Sekunde über Leben und Tod entscheiden.
Meterhohe Flammen an der verunglückten Passagiermaschine, Großalarm am Flughafen von Leipzig. Mit rund 50 Fahrzeugen rücken die Löschmannschaften an, bekämpfen den Brand und bergen Passagiere. Doch die scheinbare Katastrophe ist nur eine Notfallübung. Die Passagiere 80 Kilo schwere Dummies. Die Rettungskräfte trainieren hier an der modernsten Brandsimulationsanlage Deutschlands.
Die Übung simuliert den Absturz einer Boeing 747. Die Maschine brennt, eine Tragfläche ist abgerissen und Kerosin strömt auf die Landebahn. Beteiligt sind nicht nur die Profis vom Flughafen, sondern auch viele freiwillige Feuerwehrleute. Viele von ihnen sehen heute zum ersten Mal ein brennendes Flugzeug.
Fast jedes Szenario kann an der Hightech-Trainingsanlage simuliert werden. Brände am Fahrwerk, an den Triebwerken, im Cockpit oder auch im Passagierraum. Solche Übungen werden an internationalen Flughäfen mindestens alle 2 Jahre durchgeführt, damit die Einsatzkräfte gegen echte Katastrophen gerüstet sind.
Finally, 2 Russian cosmonauts and an American astronaut have successfully landed back on Earth after 6 months on the International Space Station. Russian Alexander Svorotsov was the first out of this Soyuz capsule after it landed in Kazakhstan. He tasted his first food back on Earth, which was an apple, before he and the other crew members were taken for medical checks. The spacecraft had suffered technical problems which had forced the crew to cancel an earlier return to Earth. Coming up next.
3 astronauts from the International Space Station have successfully returned to Earth aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft. The 2 Russians and 1 American spent almost 6 months in space. NASA says their return was delayed for a day by an undocking problem.
Der Steppe Kasachstan auf. Es war das erste Mal in der Geschichte der internationalen Raumstation ISS, dass die Rückkehr von Besatzungsmitgliedern zur Erde verschoben werden musste. Ein falsches Signal hatte verhindert, dass sich die Sojus-Kapsel von der ISS abkoppelte.
Russische Soyuz-Kapsel mit 3 Raumfahrern von der internationalen Raumstation ISS an Bord wieder auf der Erde gelandet. Die beiden russischen Astronauten und ihre US-Kollegin waren seit dem 4. April in der ISS. Ihre Rückkehr zur Erde hatte sich wegen einer Computerpanne im All verzögert. Am 10. Oktober soll wieder eine Soyuz-Kapsel mit 2 Russen und einem Amerikaner an Bord zur ISS starten.
And there was the firing of the soft landing engines.
The end of a long mission. 3 space travelers touched down safely in Kazakhstan. Their tiny capsule bears the scars from re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere. After nearly 6 months in orbit, their muscles are weak and they are carried to safety. A simple pleasure unimaginable in space, fresh food and a phone call to a loved one. The 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 American astronaut were scheduled to leave the International Space Station on Friday, but they were initially unable to depart after a computer reported a problem with the airlock on their Russian-made Soyuz spacecraft.
Good luck.
Finally ready to leave, this was their view as they undocked and inched away from the space station. Once away, Russian mission controllers tracked the Soyuz back to a landing site in Kazakhstan. It's the first time in a decade the usually reliable craft has failed to undock, and the glitch will be studied closely in America too. NASA's space shuttle fleet is due to be retired next year, leaving the Soyuz as the only craft capable of ferrying crew to and from the space station. The first Soyuz flew more than 40 years ago, but its performance will now be watched more closely than ever. Jason Caffrey, BBC News.
And don't forget, you can go to our website at bbc.com.
Astronauts from the International Space Station landed in Kazakhstan earlier today aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft. The 2 Russians and 1 American spent 176 days in space. NASA says their return was delayed for a day by an undocking problem. Spacecraft carrying the 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 U.S. astronaut had trouble undocking from the orbiting lab. The problem was fixed Friday night. This is video of the Soyuz making or landing in Kazakhstan. The crew was helped out of the capsule after spending 176 days in space.
Alarms ist eine Passagiermaschine der Pakistan International Airlines außerplanmäßig auf dem Stockholmer Flughafen gelandet. Die Boeing wurde anschließend evakuiert. An Bord waren mehr als 270 Menschen unterwegs von Kanada nach Pakistan. Die Polizei nahm einen Mann fest. Verdächtiges wurde nicht gefunden. Ausgelöst hatte den Alarm eine Anruferin, die behauptet hatte, ein Passagier führe Sprengstoff mit sich.
Ihr Flugzeug ist am Morgen in Stockholm notgelandet. Die kanadische Polizei hatte einen Hinweis erhalten, dass ein Passagier Sprengstoff mit sich führe. An Bord der Maschine waren rund 270 Menschen. Sie wurden alle in Sicherheit gebracht und ein verdächtiger Mann festgenommen. Die Boeing 777 der pakistanischen Gesellschaft PIA war ursprünglich auf dem Weg von Kanada nach Pakistan. Nach Polizeiangaben wurde bisher kein Sprengstoff gefunden. Russische Soyuz-Kapsel wieder zurück auf der Erde. Die 3 Raumfahrer landeten am frühen Morgen sicher in der kasachischen Steppe. Sie waren ein halbes Jahr im All. Zum ersten Mal in der Geschichte der internationalen Raumstation ISS musste eine Rückkehr verschoben werden. Beim Abkoppeln hatte es Computerprobleme gegeben.
Mit einem Tag Verspätung ist ein Raumschiff von der internationalen Weltraumstation ISS zur Erde zurückgekehrt. Die russische Sojus-Kapsel landete heute Morgen in Kasachstan. Technische Probleme hatten ihren Abflug verzögert. An Bord waren 2 russische Astronauten und eine amerikanische Kollegin. Fast ein halbes Jahr lang hatten sie im All verbracht. Gemäß Tradition gab es einen Apfel zur Begrüßung.
Doch eine Computerpanne verhinderte den Rückflug der russischen Soyuz-Kapsel. Heute dann beim 2. Versuch hat's geklappt. Die 3 Raumfahrer, 2 Russen und eine Amerikanerin, landeten am frühen Morgen sicher in der kasachischen Steppe. Zum ersten Mal in der Geschichte der internationalen Raumstation ISS musste eine Rückkehr verschoben werden.
Mit einem Tag Verspätung ist die Sojus-Kapsel mit 3 Raumfahrern aus der internationalen Raumstation ISS an Bord wieder auf der Erde gelandet. Kurz vor 7:30 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Sommerzeit schlug die Kapsel in der Steppe Kasachstans auf. Die Landung sei gut verlaufen. Erstmals in der Geschichte der ISS war die Rückkehr von Besatzungsmitgliedern zur Erde verschoben worden. Technische Probleme bei der Abkopplung der russischen Sojus-Kapsel von der ISS hatten den geplanten Start in der Nacht zum Freitag verhindert. Grund für das missglückte Manöver war nach Angaben der russischen Raumfahrtagentur Roskosmos ein fehlerhaftes Signal des Bordcomputers. Die Besatzung sei aber nie in Gefahr gewesen. Die 3 Raumfahrer Alexander Skvortsov, Michail Kornienko und Tracy Caldwell-Dyson waren seit Anfang April auf der ISS in 350 Kilometern Höhe im Einsatz und dort für zahlreiche wissenschaftliche Arbeiten verantwortlich.
Das Ende des Grubendramas in Chile rückt näher. Heute traf die erste von 3 stählernen Rettungskapseln am Unglücksort ein. Wie in einem Fahrstuhl sollen die 33 verschütteten Kumpel damit an die Erdoberfläche transportiert werden. Schon Ende Oktober könnten die Rettungsbohrungen abgeschlossen sein. Seit Anfang August stecken die Bergleute in 700 Metern Tiefe fest.
In Chile, there's hope that 33 trapped miners will be freed sooner than previously thought. That's because the capsule designed to pull them out has arrived over the weekend, and that is well ahead of schedule. The cage measures a narrow 50 centimeters across. It's called the Phoenix, and it's equipped with oxygen, communications equipment, retractable wheels, as well as an escape hatch. Despite Phoenix's early arrival, though, authorities are saying the rescue is still on track for early November. The Phoenix can reach the miners only when a shaft is drilled that's wide enough to accommodate the cage. There are 3 drilling efforts going on, okay? There's Plan A that's drilled 442 meters through the rock, but it needs 2 passes to make the hole wide enough. Plan B has drilled a hole wide enough, but it's gone down only 175 meters, and then its drill hammer has fallen off 3 times. Then you got Plan C. That's the unit that looks like an oil rig. It had plenty of trouble just trying to get through the hard rock, and it's drilled down about 62 meters, and that was as of the weekend. Now, I want to tell you about an unusual encounter deep in the bowels of the Earth. Carl Penhall describes what some people are calling a miracle.
Up here in the dry Atacama Desert, folklore mixes with superstition, and superstition blends with religion. And as the cold night draws in, miners' families huddle around and light a fire, and they begin to tell tales. And the tale they're telling is about the miner and the white butterfly. Part of that story is told here, in a letter sent by miner Jorge Galleguillos from the bowels of the Earth. It was afternoon on August 5th. Galleguillos and Franklin Lobos were driving a truck inside the mine. Galleguillos' letter reads, "I'd gone out to the workshop, and as we were driving back down, a block of rock caved in just a few seconds after we drove past. Just ahead, I saw a white butterfly." Galleguillos' brother, Eliodoro, also a miner, can't explain just how a butterfly flew more than 500 meters deep into the mine. Like most miners here, he's a fervent Catholic and deeply superstitious. He believes the butterfly was protecting his elder brother's life.
Ahí sí que no sé. La mariposa, un angelito que le pasó por delante, no.
I don't know what that was. Maybe that butterfly was a little angel passing in front of them, or a little god saying, "Hurry up, there's danger down there."
The blocks came down and the dust flew up. The last thing he saw during that cave-in was the white butterfly. And then after that, he said, "I can't see a hand in front of my face. I can't see a hand in front of my face." Galleguillos and Lobos were blinded by the dust, but they survived. Mining consultant Miguel Fort is not given to flights of fancy. He says white butterflies flutter around these purple flowers that blossom in the desert early in the morning, but they rarely fly deep into a mine shaft. He says the 2 miners slowed down to observe the butterfly, and that saved them from driving into rockfalls triggered by the first cave-in.
La gente que es creyente cree que es un milagro.
People who are religious would call this a miracle. From a scientific perspective, the butterfly may have flown into the mine on air currents. You can draw your own conclusions, but that butterfly saved lives.
And huddled around the fire on a cold night, the way the families tell the tale, that white butterfly was those miners' tiny guardian angel. Carl Penhall, CNN, at the San Jose mine in northern Chile.
These days, even when someone's life is flashing in front of their eyes. During the emergency landing of an airplane, for example, our Jeannie Most gives us a closer look at the phenomenon.
Ever wonder what an emergency landing is like?
Heads down, stay down.
You don't have to wonder anymore. These 2 passengers shot one on their iPhones.
Heads down, stay down. Heads down, stay down.
The sparks are from the wings scraping the runway because the landing gear didn't properly deploy.
He kind of looked at me like I was crazy. I was like, we're going to record this. As she's yelling brace, I'm kind of holding the camera like that. And so we're all here, the flight attendant's yelling, head down, head down, head down.
Heads down, stay down. Heads down, stay down.
This isn't the first emergency landing caught on tape by passengers.
Brace, brace, heads down, grab your ankle.
The flight attendant chants.
Brace, brace,
are almost identical from airline to airline. This plane landed in Washington after its front tire blew. Passengers have recorded oxygen masks deployed and even plane evacuation.
Leave the aircraft! Leave the aircraft!
All the way down the emergency slide. The most recent video of the Delta emergency landing included the incredibly calm warning from the pilot.
Brace for impact.
Alessandro Albero and Chase Benzenberg.
I didn't think we were going to die or anything.
Also captured the applause when they didn't die. And passengers thanking and hugging the pilot afterwards. As the video flew around the web, it sparked a minor debate. Just for doing her job.
Heads down! Stay down!
Yelling heads down, stay down.
Heads down! Stay down!
The flight attendant got her head handed to her by critics. Her instructions were described as nerve-wracking. If the last voice I heard on Earth was that one, I'd be one very annoyed dead guy. But others responded, give that lady a raise, and that nameless voice is my hero. Someone suggested the airlines adopt something more calming, like the chill-out mantra. Hey, you're okay. Of a performance artist called Zay Frank. You'll be fine. But I prefer my emergencies with greater urgency.
Heads down! Stay down!
Ginny Mo, CNN. Just breathe. New York.
Muss grauenhaft sein. 700 Meter unter Tage in einer staubigen Kaverne, die Luft stickig, Licht gibt's nur von schummrigen Grubenlampen und um einen herum die immer gleichen Kollegen und vor allem die Angst, dass man nie wieder rauskommt. Ja, und über Tage, da rollt momentan ein gewaltiger Medienhype an. 1500 Kameraleute und Journalisten werden erwartet, um das eine entscheidende Bild zu bekommen, nämlich den ersten Minero, der aus der Hölle da unten gerettet wird. Naja, er wird glücklich sein, rauszukommen und Medienstars sind ja mittlerweile alle von ihnen. Vielleicht kommt ja dieser Tag X schon bald. Es sieht gut aus.
Bilder aus fast 700 Meter Tiefe. In der Gold- und Kupfermine San Jose sind die eingeschlossenen Kumpel dankbar für jede Aufgabe, wie die Bergung eines fehlerhaften Bohrkopfes. Nach mehr als 7 Wochen unter Tage wird die nervliche Belastung immer größer. Am Bergungsort ist mittlerweile der erste von 3 Metallkäfigen eingetroffen. Mit ihm sollen die Bergleute gerettet werden. Die Kapsel wiegt 460 Kilogramm und hat eine Höhe von 1,90 Meter. Verwandte der Verschütteten testen die mit 53 Zentimeter Durchmesser erstaunlich große Bewegungsfreiheit am eigenen Körper. Name des Rettungssystems? Phoenix.
Ich habe mir vorgestellt, ich wäre mein Bruder, der gerade heraufgezogen wird. Ich bin total aufgeregt.
15 bis 20 Minuten wird die Auffahrt der Kumpel in die Freiheit dauern.
Der Käfig ist ausgestattet mit Sauerstoff, einer Kommunikationsvorrichtung und einem System, mit dem man notfalls einen Arbeiter auch wieder befreien kann. Die Kapsel lässt sich dazu nach unten öffnen.
Immer neues Zubehör für die mittlerweile 3 parallelen Rettungsversuche erreicht die Atacama-Wüste. Darunter auch die Röhren, mit denen der Rettungsschacht ausgekleidet werden muss, um ein Verkanten der Kapseln beim Heraufziehen ans Tageslicht zu vermeiden.
Wir werden ab sofort keine neuen Videos der Bergleute mehr nach oben schicken. Für die Rettungskräfte ist das ein zusätzlicher Aufwand, der sie von ihrem eigentlichen Ziel abhängt, nämlich sich vorzubereiten auf die Bergung.
Der kanadische Ölbohrer RIG 421 ist in einer Tiefe von über 100 Meter angelangt. Er bohrt als einziger der 3 Bohrer mit dem Idealdurchmesser. Unterdessen wurde für die Kinder der Kumpel eine Behelfsschule eingerichtet. Zusammen mit ihren Müttern kampieren die Kinder im Zeltlager in der Nähe ihrer Väter.
Ja, hoffentlich geht alles gut. Das ist ja schon verrückt, dass es bei den Rettungsversuchen zu einem Wettbewerb von 3 Bohrverfahren gekommen ist. Aber wenn das den Erfolg garantiert, dreifach gemoppelt oder gebohrt, hält bestimmt besser. Ab Mitte Oktober könnten die Eingeschlossenen bereits gerettet werden.
Offenbar zeitgleich in Deutschland und mehreren anderen europäischen Ländern Anschläge verüben. Das berichten amerikanische und britische Medien. Ein Deutsch-Afghaner aus Hamburg, so heißt es, habe das Komplott bei einem Verhör gestanden. Der Mann sitzt in einem US-Militärgefängnis in Afghanistan ein. Das Bundesinnenministerium bestätigt, dass es grundsätzlich Kenntnis über langfristige Terrorpläne habe. Aktuell gäbe es aber keinen Grund, die Warnstufe zu erhöhen. Kohlbecher berichtet.
Diese Terroristen, unter ihnen sind auch deutsche Kämpfer, sollen die Anschläge geplant haben. Sie sind Mitglieder der islamischen Bewegung Usbekistan und sorgten in Deutschland bislang nur mit diesen Propagandavideos für Schlagzeilen. Vorbild für die geplanten Anschläge seien die Attacken 2008 im indischen Mumbai gewesen. 166 Menschen starben damals in Luxushotels und im Hauptbahnhof. Die Anschläge sollten diesmal simultan in Deutschland, England und Frankreich durchgeführt werden. Potenzielle Anschläge koordiniert in mehreren Ländern durchzuführen bedeutet, dass die radikalen Islamisten ihrerseits den Krieg verschärfen. Die Informationen über die Anschlagspläne stammen von einem deutschen mutmaßlichen Mitglied der Terrororganisation. Amerikanische Sicherheitskräfte verhören ihn seit August hier im afghanischen Bagram. Er setzte sich 2009 von Hamburg aus nach Pakistan ab.
Wir haben seit geraumer Zeit erhöhte Reiseaktivitäten aus Deutschland in das afghanisch-pakistanische Grenzgebiet. Und wir wissen auch schon von zahlreichen Personen, die mit terroristischer Ausbildung wieder nach Deutschland zurückgekehrt sind.
Die deutschen Geheimdienste sind seit Wochen über die Anschlagspläne informiert und überprüfen die Informationen. Offiziell heißt es, gegenwärtig ergeben sich hieraus keine konkreten Hinweise auf unmittelbar bevorstehende Anschläge in Deutschland. Die Amerikaner haben reagiert und die Drohnenangriffe auf die Stellungen und Ausbildungslager der Terrorgruppe in Pakistan verschärft. Insgesamt 20 solcher Attacken flogen die Streitkräfte allein im September und haben so Jagd auf die Vordenker der Terroristen gemacht, um die Anschlagspläne zu durchkreuzen.
Die Nachrichten des Tages, heute mit Petra Gerster.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Hat Al-Qaida Terroranschläge in Europa geplant? Und zwar zeitgleiche Angriffe auf deutsche, französische und englische Großstädte. Das behauptet offenbar ein deutsch-afghanischer Islamist, den Amerikaner in Afghanistan festgenommen haben. Der CDU-Sicherheitsexperte Bosbach hält die Lage für besorgniserregend. Dennoch gebe es keine konkrete Bedrohung.
Von der Polizei abgesperrt der Eiffelturm in Paris. Gestern schon der zweite Terroralarm hier innerhalb von 14 Tagen. Gefunden wurde nichts, aber die französische Polizei spricht von einem enormen Risiko für einen Anschlag. Noch unklar, ob es einen Zusammenhang gibt mit Informationen aus Afghanistan von einem Gefangenen in Bagram. Dort auf der US-Militärbasis hat der Deutsch-Afghane Ahmed S. ausgesagt und offenbar Anschläge in Europa angekündigt.
Die jetzigen Erkenntnisse bestätigen die anhaltend besorgniserregende Gefährdungslage, die wir seit etwa Anfang 2009 feststellen müssen. Deutschland wird immer öfter als mögliches Anschlagsziel genannt.
Mit solchen Drohnen greifen die Amerikaner im pakistanisch-afghanischen Grenzgebiet mutmaßliche Al-Qaida-Kämpfer an. Terrorpläne sollen so frühzeitig durchkreuzt werden. Auch jene, die Ahmed S., der aus Hamburg einreiste, jetzt preisgab. In solchen Camps wollte er sich ausbilden lassen. Ahmed S. wohl kein Zeuge, dem man ungeprüft glauben würde.
Deswegen hat man diese Hinweise, die Aussagen von ihm genommen und abgeglichen. Und es gibt tatsächlich einige Hinweise darauf, dass die Details, die Ahmed S. nennt, über Hintermänner beispielsweise oder über die Art des Vorgehens, auch bei anderen Terrorverdächtigen bekannt sind.
Vorbild für neue Anschläge sollten womöglich die Angriffe in Bombay vor 2 Jahren mit über 160 Toten sein. Keine offizielle Bestätigung dafür und auch sonst offiziell Zurückhaltung.
Es gibt derzeit keine konkreten Anschlagspläne in Bezug auf Deutschland. Und es hat sich auch an der Gefährdungsbewertung für Deutschland nichts verändert.
Dennoch ist die Polizei wachsam, auch in London. Aber auch hier heißt es, Hinweise auf unmittelbar bevorstehende Anschläge gäbe es nicht.
This recruitment video, posted on YouTube in August, shows German recruits in action in what looks like the Afghan-Pakistan border region. German intelligence sources estimate hundreds of young Germans, some of Afghan and Arabic backgrounds, have joined jihadist groups since 9/11. One of them was detained in Kabul in July. His name, Ahmed Siddiqui.
He was taken into American custody. Soon he was revealing details about a plot, a Mumbai-style attack against Europe, signed off by Osama bin Laden.
Siddiqui attended this mosque in Hamburg in northern Germany, the same mosque attended by 9/11 lead hijacker Mohammed Atta. Within weeks of Siddiqui's arrest, Police closed it down. According to German intelligence officials, the mosque was closed because it had become a hotbed of extremist ideology.
Germany has a significant problem. Intelligence officials believe 200 people have traveled from Germany in order to get training in the camps along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region. Many have returned.
Intelligence agencies in France, Britain and elsewhere in Europe are also concerned about Mumbai-style attacks against economic targets by Al-Qaeda.
Mumbai-style attacks are easy in some ways to perpetrate and can have an incredible effect by portraying terrorists on TV, running around streets, randomly killing people. But make no mistake, there will be a network that's behind those men, and the intelligence agencies and security agencies in Britain and in the US will currently be trying to track down exactly who those people are.
Experts fear it could show a change in Al-Qaeda tactics as more ambitious plots against aviation and government targets are disrupted.
Allahu Akbar! They can achieve their aims and get the publicity for recruitment and fundraising that they need by soft targets, which are near impossible for government officials to secure them all.
US intelligence officials note an uptick in drone strikes in militant compounds and other targets in Pakistan's border areas. They say precise intelligence is helping them target a variety of extremist groups with the aim of thwarting fresh conspiracies. Nick Robertson, CNN, Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates.
Bericht sorgt nicht nur bei Astronomen für mächtig Wirbel. US-Forscher haben einen Planeten außerhalb unseres Sonnensystems gefunden, der möglicherweise bewohnbar ist. Wir haben zum ersten Mal einen Planeten entdeckt, der die richtigen Maße und den richtigen Abstand hat, um flüssiges Wasser und eine Atmosphäre zu beherbergen. Der Trabant ist ein gutes Stück größer als die Erde. Er umkreist einen Stern mit dem etwas ungewöhnlichen Namen Gliese 581G. Die Wissenschaftler prüfen jetzt, ob es in der Atmosphäre zwischen den beiden Himmelskörpern auch Gase gibt, wie etwa Sauerstoff oder Kohlendioxid. Das wäre ein Hinweis darauf, dass dort auch Lebensformen existieren könnten, die denen auf der Erde ähneln.
Das waren die Vox-Nachrichten.
Zum ersten Mal haben wir einen Planeten gefunden, der die richtige Masse und den richtigen Abstand hat, um flüssiges Wasser und eine Atmosphäre zu beherbergen. Der Planet, der größer ist als die Erde, umkreist einen Stern mit dem Namen Gliese 581 in einem Abstand, den die Wissenschaftler als bewohnbare Zone bezeichnen. Wenn es in der dortigen Atmosphäre Gase wie Sauerstoff und Kohlendioxid gibt, dann könnte es durchaus sein, dass dort Lebensformen existieren, die denen auf der Erde ähneln. Sollte es der Wissenschaft wirklich gelingen, Leben außerhalb unseres Sonnensystems nachzuweisen, dann könnten wir vielleicht mehr darüber erfahren, welchen Platz die Menschheit in der Hierarchie des Lebens im Universum wirklich einnimmt.
For many astronomers, it is the holy grail. Life on other planets. Now we may be one step closer to that discovery. Astronomers say that they have found this. This is actually an artist representation of the most Earth-like planet yet. They believe that this could support life. It's called Gliese 581G. It is 3 times the mass of Earth. It's got favorable temperatures and similar gravity to our own planet. It's close-ish, about 20 light years away. Scientists say that this is a game changer, and they're likely to find more like this, known as exoplanets.
The Holy Grail. Well, now we may be one step closer to that discovery, potentially. U.S. astronomers say they found the most Earth-like planet yet. This is an artist's view. Scientists believe Gliese 581G just might be able to support life. It's in a so-called habitable zone where favorable temperatures mean water might stay liquid, like our own planet. This planet is close, cosmically, just 20 light years away. Myra Ramos joins us now from the Interplanetary Weather Center to tell us more about this. I know you're usually looking at our planet, but by the looks of it, this planet looks a lot like ours.
It is very similar to Earth in so many ways, and that's what a scientist is so excited about this, Jonathan. The main question everybody wants to know is, hey, you know what? Is anybody out there? That's what they're trying to do. They figure that if they find planets that are similar to Earth, we may be able to find life on other planets. Maybe they won't look too much like you or I, but maybe some sort of life out there, right? That's what they want to know. The habitable zone that you mentioned is on the planet itself. It's also referred to as the Goldilocks Zone, you know, like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, because it has to be not too cold, not too hot. Things have to be, quote unquote, just right. So that's why they look for Earth-like planets. They're called Earth-like exoplanets, extra-orbital planets. That's what they're trying to do. And so they have found these. There's actually over 400 exoplanets that they have found that are Earth-like. And what they look for in particular is how far away the planet is from its actual star. Like, you know, for example, is it close like how we are from the sun? How hot is that star? Also, that helps regulate the temperature of the planet itself. The size of the planet is also really important. You don't want a huge planet like Jupiter, because then the gravity would be too great and it would be hard to even keep an atmosphere, a proper atmosphere. If it's too small, then the atmosphere wouldn't be there either. So the main thing that they want to look for is these three things. If they find that, they say that it might be possible to actually have liquid water. They think that that's possible on Gliese 581G. It's kind of interesting the way the planet rotates. It faces the star the whole entire time, so it's blazing hot on one side, freezing cold on the other, Jonathan. But they say that right in between, in that line between light and dark, that's where life could possibly exist.
Well, we will keep our eyes on it. Gliese 581G. That does it for us here at the International Desk. For Mario Ramos, I'm Jonathan Mann.
Gliese 581G und ist der Erde offenbar so ähnlich wie kein anderer bislang bekannter Planet. Gliese liegt 20 Lichtjahre von uns entfernt und damit nach kosmischen Verhältnissen praktisch nur um die Ecke. Er ist aber mit heutiger Raumfahrttechnik unerreichbar. Der Planet ist vermutlich etwas größer und schwerer als die Erde und es könnte dort Wasser geben. Was aber noch nicht heißt, dass Menschen dort wirklich überleben könnten oder gar eine neue Form von Leben entstanden ist.
This launch actually also coincides with China's National Day, where they're celebrating 61 years of communist rule. I'm Zane Vergy in London, World Sport.
That is something very interesting that you're looking at. This is the lunar launch in China. It's going on in Sichuan province over there. We're going to be looking at that launch pad. We saw that seconds ago. There's the control room. We're waiting for this launch to happen for this unmanned lunar probe. When it gets into orbit, it'll be about 15 kilometers away from the moon, and there had been some fears that thunderstorms would delay this launch. They did all the calculations. They just had 3 days in the year to do it. Let's listen in.
Well, liftoff. We have a liftoff of the rocket carrying China's lunar probe into space.
So there you go. Looks like a success so far. The Chang'e 2 will reach lunar orbit in the next 5 days. And it will eventually come, like I said just before, within about 15 kilometers of the moon. So the aim, I hear you ask, it's to test landing technology for the next phase of the mission, as well as to take high-resolution photographs in the lead up to the launch. More than 2,000 residents actually in Xichang were evacuated as a precaution. The mission coincides with China's National Day holiday and marks the 61st anniversary of communist rule. There's the control room for you.
By the telemetry data, we can see everything is okay. But we're still tracking that. Right. And this is a simulation of its movement.
So there you go. So far, so good. A successful launch of that lunar probe, and I'm sure many in China will be applauding that coming on the National Day, especially given they just had 3 days in the year where they could do this launch. So they got it in on day one of those 3 days. Great pictures to see. Now we bring you up to date on the rest of the news.
The United States and Russia, Chang'e 2 launched a few minutes ago on China's National Day, and it will conduct tests whilst orbiting the moon. Scientists hope it will pave the way for an eventual unmanned landing.
You are watching CNN's special coverage of the mine disaster in Chile. About a month into this rescue effort, the U.S. Space Agency answered a request from the Chilean government, sending in a team of experts. Well, they're back at their day jobs now, and they came together for their first group interview on a global broadcast here on CNN. Earlier, I spoke to them. Take a look. First of all, Dr. James Duncan, how do you go about managing an operation of this size and prioritizing?
Well, first of all, the Chileans are doing a wonderful job of managing the rescue effort. It was interesting to us how well organized they were when they got down there. Of course, they're managing from various levels, the engineering aspect of it, the 3 plans for drilling the rescue shafts. They're managing the medical teams and the psychologic teams. You know, the important thing about this entire operation is the fact that it is one of a very long duration, and so the aspect of a marathon, we're settling into this phase right now where there's a lot of anticipation for the rescue, but that's still a number of weeks away. So the management there has to maintain the team in good operating order and coordinated fashion.
And Dr. Holland, what is the greatest psychological concerns? Because presumably as the weeks go by, the men go through various stages of emotion.
Right now we're in a long, flat run. As the weeks chew by, as the drilling continues. And so I think in this aspect you're looking for maintaining the social order, maintaining the daily routines, providing them with something new from time to time they hadn't expected, providing the families and them with information about how the drilling's coming. These are all the important things to maintain their proper expectation.
I mean, a few weeks ago I know that alcohol and cigarettes had been banned, and now I gather cigarettes are allowed. What is the psychological motive behind that?
Well, the men smoked cigarettes in the mine previously, and that was their normal. So it was just back to normal for them. That's what they were asking. But there were some medical concerns about the air in the mine and about respiratory illness, and so there was some concern on the medical doctor's part. But from a psychological point of view, allowing them to have cigarettes was actually very good. Alcohol, not so good.
Yes, perhaps not. If I could ask you, Dr. Holland, again, in terms of the psychology of this, there has been some talk that the men might be actually rescued in mid-October, some weeks ahead of the earlier estimated deadline. Would they be aware of that? Would it serve any purpose to make them aware of that if that were a deadline that couldn't be met?
It would actually be better not to make them aware of that. They've already been told they'll be out before Christmas, and I know the uncertainty of not having an actual hard date is difficult on them, but it's much better to think longer and to be surprised pleasantly when it's shorter than the other way around.
Yes. Dr. Polk, your specialist field is emergency medicine. There was obviously a very clear and urgent emergency at the beginning of this, but I'm wondering now, do you consider this to be an ongoing emergency, and what contingencies are in your mind should something, God forbid, go wrong?
Absolutely. I mean, the emergency's far from over. Certainly, you have different phases, and we broke this mission into different phases. The initial cave-in is the big emergency with trauma potential, but as we go into the rescue, you're going up in a cage 2,400 feet. You know, that's there's a lot of things that can go wrong. The cage could get stuck. Folks could pass out in the cage. You could have rock falls or cave-ins between now and then. So it's very much still an active emergency, and will be until the miners are out and well cared for and stable after they're out.
And just how much can one prepare for an emergency?
The Chilean health officials have consulted a lot of folks, and they are doing simulations and preparing both their pre-hospital personnel as well as their hospital personnel, and doing simulations for what to expect with patients and what they might foresee happening with any particular patient. And that drilling and that anticipation and that continued exercise helps everyone to get in the right mindset. As always, and as we do here at NASA, it's always better to prepare for the worst and for contingencies, and as Dr. Holland mentioned, be pleasantly surprised.
Dr. Duncan, in all your time at NASA, did you ever envisage having to work in a kind of emergency like this, literally underground, diametrically opposed in many ways to people being in space in an emergency? Or do you see there's a similarity?
Well, there are similarities. The first is the fact that it's a isolated, austere kind of environment with its own inherent risks. The risks may be somewhat different between space and being underground, trapped in the mine, but the psychological stresses, the physical responses to stress are quite similar.
What is, to your mind, apart from the obvious priority of getting everybody out alive and safe and well, has been the biggest learning curve, and what do you think you will take away from this, assuming it all goes well?
Well, of course, we have great hopes that indeed the rescue will go well. You know, from a medical standpoint, I think the Chileans were well prepared. We were able to make some commentary and provide some insight. To my feeling, it's the behavioral health support that's been the most important thing for us to impart to our Chilean colleagues. Not only management of the miners in the mine and the topside personnel, but also an understanding how the families respond and what to expect once the rescue is effected, and those very important weeks and months after rescue, how the miners and the families will have to be reintegrated.
Doctors Duncan, Holland and Pug, thank you all very much for joining us. Well, we're joined now by NASA's principal engineer, Clint Cragg. He has experience of submarines, and I'd first of all like to ask you, thank you for joining us, what your primary similarity is with the miners underground from your experience being underwater.
Well, the obvious comparison is that they can't see sunlight for months at a time, just like we couldn't. But one of the things that we did in the submarine force was we were always busy, and that helped a lot to keep your mind off other things. And that's what the miners are doing now. They've got them in 3 shifts. They're working around the clock to clear the rubble away from the rescue holes.
The drilling, as you know, has reached a critical stage, and I wonder what are your primary concerns now for the weeks ahead?
What I'm concerned about, I think, is the rescue capsule. I put together a team of tech fellows from the NASA Engineering and Safety Center, and we ended up sending them probably 75 or 100 requirements for them to use in designing what you saw on Saturday. One miner fits in at a time. We stipulated that one miner ought to be able to operate the entire capsule himself. In other words, secure himself in without assistance, and the rationale obviously would be that at some point there's going to be just one guy left, and he's got to be able to extract himself without help.
And there is the difficulty, of course, with the rescue capsule arising through the ground, as it were, that there could be rock falls. So is there any way to be able to not prevent those rock falls, but minimize their impact?
We thought that the capsule ought to have some protection on the top of it for precisely that occurrence. We also said that the miners ought to have hard hats on and some protective goggles and things like that. And from what I'm hearing from my Chilean friends that we met down there, that most of the recommendations we made for this capsule have been incorporated into the design.
Well, some of the miners say a white butterfly saved their lives. Is it folklore, fantasy, or actually feasible?
Plan to put Chinese astronauts on the moon. The Chang'e 2 probe, launched on China's National Day, will orbit the moon and take images of possible landing sites for unmanned craft. Martin Patience has the story for us from Beijing.
China's latest lunar expedition could take the country one step closer to putting a man on the moon. Broadcast live on national TV, the Chang'e 2 probe will orbit within 15 kilometers of the moon. It will carry out various tests in preparation for an unmanned landing expected in the next 3 years. The country hopes to put a Chinese astronaut on the moon by 2025, a feat which until now only America has achieved. Coming on National Day, China's space program is a growing source of pride here. In the next few years, Beijing hopes its technology and expertise will be a match for the American and Russian programs. But there are fears of a future space arms race after China blew up one of its own satellites 3 years ago. Like America, China wants to stake its claim in space, and neither country will want to be eclipsed.
Im Iran soll er das Atomkraftwerk Bushehr lahmgelegt haben. Jetzt meldet Siemens, dass der gefährliche Parasit auch in 5 Anlagen in Deutschland aufgetaucht ist. Nina Lehnhoff berichtet.
Es sind Horrorszenarien. Ampeln fallen aus, das Stromnetz bricht zusammen oder Gaspipelines explodieren, weil ihre Computersysteme manipuliert wurden durch Viren wie Stuxnet. Auch bei deutschen Firmen ist es schon aufgetreten, konnte aber entfernt werden. Doch die Attacke auf das iranische Kernkraftwerk hat gezeigt, Hacking hat eine neue Dimension erreicht. Nicht mehr nur einzelne PCs werden angegriffen, sondern gesamte Steuerungsanlagen.
Meiner Auffassung nach handelt es sich um die erste professionelle elektronische Kriegswaffe, die eingesetzt wird gegen IT-Systeme.
Der Iran hat inzwischen angeblich mehrere Saboteure festgenommen, die das Virus eingeschleust haben könnten. Denn es wird über USB-Sticks weitergegeben und hat es auf von Siemens entwickelte Anlagen abgesehen. Es ist ein verstecktes Schadprogramm, das sich selbst verbreitet, Computersysteme stört und die Handschrift von Fachleuten trägt, möglicherweise Militärs oder Geheimdiensten.
Für die Entwicklung von Stuxnet wurden so viele Ressourcen gebraucht. Wir reden hier von einem Team von ungefähr 50 Mann. Wir reden hier von den weltbesten Experten und von einem Aufwand von mehreren Millionen Euro.
Die Cyberwelt als neues Schlachtfeld. Wahrscheinlich hat ein Staat den Angriff gesteuert. Schon vor 3 Jahren legte Israel per Computervirus das Radarsystem der syrischen Luftabwehr lahm, griff unentdeckt eine geheime Baustelle an. Die Armeen von rund 20 Ländern, auch die deutsche, haben inzwischen Spezialabteilungen mit eigenen Hackern eingerichtet, um gewappnet zu sein im Krieg der Computer.
Mit Siemens-Steuerungssoftware mit ein und demselben Virus infiziert. Stuxnet, so der Name, hat das Ziel, Maschinen zum Beispiel in Atomkraftwerken zu sabotieren und gezielt zu beschädigen. Iran und China klagen über massenhafte Infektionen und auch in Deutschland sind die ersten Fälle jetzt bekannt geworden. Wer den Virus geschrieben hat und vor allem warum, Alexander Tobian berichtet.
Der Trojaner Stuxnet scheint auf den ersten Blick absolut harmlos. Er sammelt keine persönlichen Daten, klaut keine Passwörter und steuert auch nicht den heimischen Rechner fern. Und trotzdem ist er unglaublich gefährlich.
Die Software findet sich auf einigen 10.000 Rechnern. Windows-PCs können davon befallen werden. Das ist aber nicht der interessante Teil, weil der auf diesen PCs nichts tut, sondern die sind nur dazu da, ihn weiter zu schleusen in Richtung solcher Industrieanlagen. Und diese Industrieanlagen haben dann eine bestimmte Sorte von Steuerungsgeräten, die da befallen wird.
Entgegen herkömmlichen Viren zieht der Wurm Umwege dem schnellen Internet vor. Die Wurmautoren suchen sich eine Firma im Umfeld des Unternehmens und bringen dort, etwa durch einen verschenkten oder absichtlich verlorenen USB-Stick, ihr Programm in die Nähe des Ziels. Wenn etwa ein Ingenieur sein Notebook damit infiziert und es anschließend im Unternehmen ans Netzwerk anschließt, ist der Schaden kaum noch aufzuhalten. Wahrscheinlich kam auch Stuxnet so in die iranischen Atomanlagen, die sein eigentliches Ziel waren. Bleibt die Frage nach dem Urheber.
Es gibt die Vermutung, dass vom Aufwand her, der nötig gewesen sein muss, um diesen Schädling zu bauen, nur eine Einrichtung in Frage kommt, die über sehr viel Geld verfügt und bereit ist, dieses Geld für ein spezielles Ziel in die Hand zu nehmen. Und es gibt die Spekulation, dass das nur ein Staat gewesen sein kann.
Wurden früher noch gegnerische Industrieanlagen bombardiert, reicht heute bereits ein entsprechender Virus. Geheimdienste und Staaten im digitalen Wettrüsten.
Luftfahrtpionier Leonardo da Vinci hätte seine wahre Freude gehabt. Der Ingenieursdoktorand Todd Reichert verwirklichte in Kanada den jahrhundertealten Menschheitstraum, mit künstlichen Flügeln aus eigener Kraft zu fliegen. Der Tüftler schaffte es, sein mit Pedalen angetriebenes Flugobjekt für 19 Sekunden in der Luft zu halten. Mehr über den neuen Traum vom Fliegen von Mittlocher.
Schneevogel taufte das Team der Ingenieurswissenschaften der Uni Toronto den Wundergleiter. 19,3 Sekunden blieb die Snowbird in der Luft. Eigentlich nur ein Hüpfer, aber für die Fliegerei eine Sensation. Nur mit Muskelkraft zu fliegen und dabei die Flügel schwingen zu lassen wie ein Vogel. Mit einer Durchschnittsgeschwindigkeit von 26 Stundenkilometern war der Prototyp auf seiner kurzen Reise unterwegs. Ein großes Netzwerk an Mitarbeitern hat das überhaupt erst ermöglicht, würdigt Brenda McCabe die Leistungen ihrer Universitätskollegen. Ornithopter heißt ein solches Fluggerät, das nur mit Muskelkraft fliegt. In aller Frühe hatten die jungen Luftfahrtpioniere in Tottenham, Ontario, das Flugzeug startklar gemacht. Das Leichtgewicht wog dank Kohlefasern, Balsaholz und Plastik nur 43 Kilo. Um Gewicht zu sparen, hatte Pilot und Student Todd Reichert sogar noch 8 Kilo abgenommen. Die Spannweite des Flügels war so groß wie bei einem ausgewachsenen Verkehrsflugzeug, nur erheblich dünner und vor allem beweglich. Nach dem Ausklinken des Schleppkabels blieb das zarte Vehikel nur durch das Auf und Ab der Schwingen in der Luft. Der Internationale Luftfahrtverband wird den ersten Flug aus Menschenkraft in den nächsten Tagen amtlich bestätigen.
10 Jahre sind Forscher in einer internationalen Gemeinschaftsaktion dieser Frage auf den Grund gegangen und fanden bei ihrer Volkszählung unter Wasser mehr als 1200 neue Arten von Meerestieren. Insgesamt sollen in den Weltmeeren 1 Million Arten zu Hause sein. Und bisweilen sehen sie ziemlich merkwürdig aus. Ulrich Klose und Sabine Friedrich berichten.
Es gibt viel mehr Leben im Ozean, als wir jemals geglaubt haben. Das wissen die Forscher nun, nachdem sie 10 Jahre lang abgetaucht sind in die Wunderwelt der Weltmeere. Ein überwältigendes Erlebnis.
Auch in den dunklen Tiefen der Tiefsee, wo wir waren, in 4.000, 5.000 Metern Tiefe, haben wir reiches Leben gefunden. Und es ist vor allen Dingen auch wunderschön.
Bei ihrer gewaltigen Volkszählung im Meer stießen sie zum Beispiel auf neuartige Schildkröten, den Dumbo-Oktopus oder die schwimmende arktische Schnecke. Mehr als 1200 neue Arten konnten näher erforscht werden. 5000 Meerestiere sichteten die Forscher zum allerersten Mal.
Wir haben praktisch aus allen Tiergruppen was gefunden. Krebse, Schnecken, Würmer, Fische, Seesterne, Seegurken, was es gibt.
Von der Arktis bis zu den Tropen hatten 2700 Wissenschaftler aus 80 Ländern den Planeten Ozean durchkämmt. Sie markierten Wale, um deren Wege zu verfolgen, nahmen Proben und untersuchten Lebensräume. Ergebnis? Der Ozean verändert sich. Die Meere sind mehr vernetzt als bisher angenommen, aber auch nachweislich durch den Menschen in Gefahr.
Meine größte Sorge ist der sehr große Einfluss, den wir als Menschen auf das Meer haben. Besonders durch Fischerei, aber auch durch Klimawandlung, Verschmutzung und die Veränderung von Küstenhabitat.
Am Ende blieb den Wissenschaftlern auch eine nüchterne Erkenntnis. Der größte Teil des Ozeans wird immer unentdeckt bleiben. Er ist einfach zu groß. Doch schon für diese Schnappschüsse hat sich der Aufwand doch gelohnt.
10 Jahre lang haben 2700 Wissenschaftler aus 80 Ländern daran gearbeitet, eine ungefähre Vorstellung von der Artenvielfalt der Weltmeere zu bekommen. Jetzt wurden die Ergebnisse vorgestellt. Antje Lorenz.
Über 6000 neu entdeckte Arten. In der Tiefsee wimmelt es vor Leben. Ölschluckende Würmer oder blinde Hummer. Die Schattenwelt am Meeresgrund glänzt durch Vielfalt. Wir kennen ungefähr 250.000 Arten. Wahrscheinlich gibt es aber über 1 Million. Wir haben die Vielfalt ganz klar unterschätzt. Die Tiefsee ist das größte Ökosystem der Welt. In 540 Einzelexpeditionen machten sich die Forscher auf, Licht in das maritime Dunkel zu bringen. Besonders Australien, China, Japan, die Karibik und der Golf von Mexiko standen im Mittelpunkt. Es sind die artenreichsten Meereslebensräume dieses Planeten. Gerade zu ihrem Schutz, zum Beispiel beim Kampf gegen Folgen von Umweltkatastrophen, ist das Wissen über die Ökosysteme wesentlich. Bei früheren Katastrophen war eines der Probleme, dass wir keinen Vorher-Nachher-Vergleich hatten und nicht wirklich wussten, wie die Erholung voranschreitet. Im Golf haben wir das jetzt. Nicht nur Ölkatastrophen bedrohen das Leben im Wasser, Überfischung ist das größte Problem. Dass es sich lohnt, die Meere zu schützen, zeigt jetzt diese Studie. Denn die Tiefsee, sie lebt. Sie ist
Bis 2004 waren nur 5% der Weltmeere erforscht. Und genau das soll sich ändern. Das internationale Projekt Census of Marine Life beschäftigt Wissenschaftler in mehr als 82 Ländern mit der Erforschung der Ozeane. Und wir dürfen mit abtauchen zur Volkszählung unter Wasser.
Es ist ein faszinierendes Bild, das sich dem Betrachter in den Tiefen des Meeres bietet. Arten gibt es viele. Aber wie viele genau, das war bislang nicht bekannt. Um eine Antwort auf diese Frage zu finden, haben Forscherteams die Schlüsselregionen der Ozeane befahren und sie systematisch untersucht. Von der Arktis über die Tropenregionen bis hin zur Antarktis. Ein Jahrzehnt lang haben sie ihre Sonden und Kameras auf Tiere und Pflanzen gerichtet und die Daten über die mikroskopisch kleinen Lebewesen ausgewertet. Am Ende ihrer Artenzählung haben die Wissenschaftler eine vorläufige Antwort gefunden. 250.000 wissenschaftlich beschriebene höhere Arten gibt es in den Meeren. Und das dürfte noch nicht alles sein. Zum ersten Mal überhaupt gibt es jetzt einen umfassenden Katalog, auf den jeder Zugriff hat. Und wer zum Beispiel etwas über die Artenvielfalt in der Karibik wissen möchte, bekommt einen Artikel und zusätzliches Material mit einer Liste der repräsentativen und am besten erforschten Arten dieser Region. Nur 2% des Artenreichtums machen die großen Meeresbewohner wie Wale, Robben oder Seevögel aus. Viel häufiger kommen Fische oder Krustentiere vor. Die Kosmopoliten der Meere aber sind winzige tierische Algen und Plankton. Fast überall in den Ozeanen sind diese Mikroorganismen zu Hause. Zu den besonders reichen Schatzkammern gehören die Meere rund um Australien und Japan. Gleichzeitig ist die Vielfalt hier am meisten bedroht, vor allem durch den Menschen. Bei aller Mühe, die sich die maritimen Volkszähler gemacht haben, ihr Artenkatalog ist nur ein Schnappschuss der Meeresvielfalt. Denn auf jede erfasste Art kommen wohl noch 4 weitere, die unbekannt sind. Und viele von ihnen, so die Befürchtung, werden aussterben, noch ehe wir uns ein Bild von ihrer Schönheit gemacht haben.
Carl Penhall joins us now live from the San Jose mine in Copiapo, Chile. Carl, we were talking about before that it could have been months before that these miners could be reached. Now it could happen within days.
Exactly, Manita. The timeline has been changing constantly here. The government has been trying not to raise expectations too much. This really is uncharted territory. No kind of mine rescue like this has ever been carried out anywhere in the world before. But as the rescue operation got into swing, that has allowed the government to reduce the timeline. And yes, you can see there behind, that's where the rescue operation has been going on around the clock, day and night. Nothing really stops there except to change the drill hammers on these drills. And that is the problem right now, because over the last few days, all 3 drills working to drill down 700 meters underground have run into technical problems. They've run into areas of hard rock. Drill bits have broken, so those have had to be replaced. And so the distance that this drill has to go now is about 140 meters. That on a normal day's work could be done in about 3 days. But because of these technical problems, we still don't know exactly. But the president himself, the Chilean president, is saying that he believes it's going to be before the 15th of October that these 33 men will be back to the surface. It could even be a couple of days before that, if all goes well, Manita.
Reaching them is one thing, but getting them out is another. What kind of, I guess, technicalities are involved with that?
Yeah, first of all, they have to achieve what they're calling breakthrough, and that will be the point where the drill goes through into the ceiling of the mine workshop. In fact, that was an area where they had scoops, backhoes, and trucks down there in the mine. That's at a depth of 623 meters. And the so-called Plan B drill will be making a hole about 28 inches wide, 70 centimeters. Once that breakthrough is achieved, the government and rescue workers are still debating whether they're going to have to encase that entire 623-meter shaft with steel tubing. If they do that, that will just kind of shore up the walls of that shaft and make sure there are no last-minute surprises. Once all that is in place, they're going to drop a rescue capsule down, a rescue cage that has been dubbed the Phoenix capsule, because the government says this is really what is going to bring these men back to life. This will signify their rebirth. But that rescue capsule is a very narrow fit, 21.5 inches across. In centimeters, that's probably in the order of about 55 centimeters. And so that is a tight fit. It's got wheels on it, it's got an oxygen line in it, it's got a communications channel so that the miner inside can talk permanently to the rescuers on the surface. But of course the miners have had to been using these weeks and days to get in shape so they can in fact fit inside that, because some of these guys are bulky guys, Manita.
All right, Carl Penhall in Copiapó, Chile, thank you so much.
GPS in Betrieb gehen und auch China arbeitet nicht mehr mit Europa zusammen, sondern entwickelt ein eigenes System. Dass die Europäer deshalb nun auf chinesische Technik verzichten, wirft den Zeitplan erneut durcheinander. Und trotzdem wollen die Regierungen an Galileo festhalten, aus politischen Gründen.
Ich kann nur sagen, dass dieses Galileo-System für Europa von einer ganz herausragenden strategischen Bedeutung ist, weil es uns unabhängig macht vom GPS-System von Amerika.
Diese Alternative zum militärisch kontrollierten US-System wird allerdings nicht nur immer teurer, sie wird auch auf längere Sicht nur als Computeranimation existieren. Denn fertig wird Galileo wohl erst 2018, also gut 10 Jahre später als geplant.
Richtet, aber damals gab es uns ja noch gar nicht. Und so gönnen wir den Kollegen von CNN International gerne diese Breaking News, die wirklich die Geschichte von Deutschland wie keine andere bestimmen sollte. Wir haben uns mit Ihnen gefreut, als Sie jetzt in Frankfurt auf ein Vierteljahrhundert internationaler Nachrichtengeschichte zurückblickten.
Live auf Sendung zu gehen, das ist für CNN-Urgestein Jim Clancy längst Alltag. Doch dieser Auftritt bei der Jubiläumsfeier in Frankfurt ist auch für ihn was Besonderes. Ich bin Teil des Senders nicht seit 30 Jahren, aber seit 29 Jahren und 9 Monaten und darauf bin ich sehr stolz. Vor 30 Jahren ging CNN in den USA erstmals auf Sendung. 5 Jahre später gingen die Breaking News dann rund um den Globus. Und auch Deutschland hat immer wieder für Schlagzeilen gesorgt. Deutschland ist sehr wichtig für CNN. Es ist der zweitgrößte Markt für uns. Hier können uns mehr Zuschauer sehen als in anderen Teilen der Welt. Außerdem hat Deutschland großen Einfluss. Was hier von Bedeutung ist, wird auch für den Rest der Welt wichtig werden. Vertreter aus Politik und Wirtschaft ließen bei der Jubiläumsfeier 30 Jahre Nachrichten Revue passieren.
Die Wissbegierde zu sehen, was ist auf dem Globus, was passiert täglich, ist etwas, was uns alle bewegt.
Die Zuschauer, davon ist Clancy überzeugt, werden in Zukunft noch viel mehr als bisher zum Programm beitragen.
Have the door already. So let's do it. Which dates? 7th. Do I translate this? That's the right decision. You can lie down if that's more convenient. Okay, let's move.
Not going to drop flowers?
So they cleared the path right away. Remember, we are sending you up there to visit, and we expect you to come back safely, and we wish you Godspeed. Thank you, and God help you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Godspeed. guys. Back up. Good luck.
You were there.
Step down on that tail. No rush. That's the right way. No rush. Did you find it? Yes. Secure this one.
Последнюю ночь?
Last night.
А без этих давали?
They gave us without the Velcro. Yeah, it's just the brown colored rubber band. That's original design. You fold it over in half. So you fold it over on your wrist. So entire night you spent trying to measure it. Well, it's the same way we used to take out jeans. When you would pick out jeans at an open air market, it's inconvenient to try them on. Therefore, the rule of thumb was that your neck size is half of your waist. My grandma used to tell me that. Let's go. Pressure check. Let's go. We are going to, right? close it.
Oh.
We've checked Scott's suit, everything is nominal. And then we got worried. So let's start, and Krikalev, the head of Gagarin Center for Training of Cosmonauts, has the floor. You have done everything you could to prepare for this flight. I would like to wish you luck at this stage of this new Soyuz vehicle. Good luck. Thank you.
Captain Oleg, congratulations on getting to this point.
Саша, Скотт и Олег, поздравляю вас с тем, что вы дошли до этого ответственного этапа.
You look relaxed, and the teams are ready to support you on the ground.
Судя по внешнему виду, вы спокойном состоянии сейчас находитесь, что хорошо. А мы со своей стороны наземного обеспечения сделаем все необходимое поддержать.
Crew on board space station is ready for your arrival and ready to have you go to work on board space station.
Экипаж совместными усилиями продолжит работу по обеспечению станции всем необходимым.
You will have plenty of good work to do. You'll be very busy during your expedition, but take some time and enjoy yourself.
Работа перед вами. У вас будет возможность иногда хотя бы расслабляться и наслаждаться станцией.
The State Commission has concluded its meeting. The tanking is on as we speak. All heads of departments have reported that all systems are ready to go. I sincerely congratulate you on completion of your preparation and the fact that you are ready to ingress the Soyuz vehicle. Will be in touch at all times with you, and we will be prepared to answer all of your questions. Thank you. The crew commander has the floor. First of all, thank you so much for all your hard work. Everything is fine. It's always great to get confirmation that everything is fine. We are prepared to start the work. And with all the responsibility that we have, I must say we are excited about this, especially for those who do this for the first time. Thank you. Thank you for your wishes of good luck. We'll try to do our best to live up to your expectations. Scott Kelly. I would like to say that I am convinced that everything will go as planned. And I know that the crew is prepared.
Important to make that they get home. Thank you. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Let's go. Line up, please. Chairman of the State Committee, the crew of Soyuz TMA-01M is ready. Thank you. Yeah, tell us when we can approach. Thank you. Oleg is first.
Good afternoon from the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where at this hour flight controllers are set for the launch of the next residents of the International Space Station, the 3 crew members who will soon join the Expedition 25 crew. The Russian Soyuz rocket is on its launch pad at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, 1,200 miles southeast of Moscow, as it sits fully fueled, ready to launch about 55 minutes from now at 6:10 p.m. Central Time. That's 5:10 a.m. Kazakhstan time, Friday morning. Aboard are Expedition 25 flight engineer Oleg Skropochka, flight engineer and Soyuz commander Alexander Kaleri, and NASA flight engineer Scott Kelly. The Soyuz capsule was mated to its booster 3 days ago, and the Soyuz rocket, which stands 162 feet tall and weighs 680,000 pounds, was transported by rail car to the launch pad shortly after sunrise on Tuesday. The launch pad is the same one used almost 50 years ago to support the launch of Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, on April 12, 1961. Once launched, Kaleri, as Soyuz commander, and Skropochka, as the onboard Soyuz flight engineer, will oversee several orbital correction burns using thrusters on the spacecraft to adjust its altitude relative to that of the International Space Station. After docking and hatch opening, the new crew will join the current crew, Station Commander Doug Wheelock and flight engineers Fyodor Yurchikhin and Shannon Walker, to complete the Expedition 25 crew. Wheelock, Yurchikhin, and Walker have been aboard the station since June 18th, with a scheduled return to Earth in late November aboard Soyuz TMA-19. You can see the entire crew together in this photo. 2 spaceflight veterans and 1 first-time flyer make up the Soyuz crew to the International Space Station. Veteran cosmonaut and Soyuz commander Alexander Kaleri will be making his 5th flight into space today, equaling a mark set by 3 other cosmonauts as the second most flown cosmonaut in history after Sergei Krikalev, who has flown 6 times. Kaleri first served aboard the Russian Mir space station in 1992 as part of the Mir 11 mission. He visited Mir once again 5 years later as a member of the Mir 22, and again in the summer of 2000 as flight engineer of Mir 28, the very last Mir resident crew. Cleary returned to space in 2003, this time as Expedition 8 flight engineer of the International Space Station. He's logged a total of 611 days in space, including 23 hours and 38 minutes spent performing 5 separate spacewalks. U.S. Navy Captain and NASA astronaut Scott Kelly will be making his 3rd trip into space today and his first aboard a Soyuz. He first flew into space in December 1999 as pilot of Space Shuttle Discovery on the STS-103 mission, the 3rd shuttle flight to visit and repair the Hubble Space Telescope. Kelly made his 2nd flight to the station as a commander of Shuttle Endeavour on the STS-118 mission to the International Space Station, a mission that brought ISS new gyroscopes, a new starboard truss segment, and more than 5,000 pounds of critical equipment and supplies. Scott Kelly is also the twin brother of veteran NASA astronaut Mark Kelly, commander of the STS-134 Space Shuttle mission, scheduled for launch in late February of next year. Russian cosmonaut Oleg Skripochka will be making his first trip into space today. He holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the Bauman State Technical University and served for 7 years as a mechanic and engineer at RSC Energia. Skripochka was qualified as a test cosmonaut in November of 1999. This mission launches under the call sign Ingol, the name of a powerful river in the southern Ukraine, and the same call sign chosen by Cleary for his launch aboard Soyuz TMA-3 as Expedition 8 flight engineer 7 years ago this month. The talisman you'll see hanging over the commander's seat during ascent is a small toy stuffed animal. It will be used to indicate weightlessness when Cleary and Kelly and Skripochka reach orbit. In the last couple of hours, some of the countdown milestones have included activation of systems for health checks of radio communications, thermal control, and mission control systems. And observing launch preparations at Baikonur is a NASA contingent that includes Public Affairs Officer Rob Navias, who's been at the launch site since Monday. He filed a report on preparations a short time ago.
Here at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, the stage is set for the launch of the Soyuz TMA-01M spacecraft and its Expedition 25 crew members, kicking off a 6-month increment on the orbital outpost that will be packed with science, space shuttle missions, and the arrival of other visiting vehicles. The crew boarded the Soyuz vehicle about an hour and a half ago. We're watching the clock tick backward in the pre-dawn darkness until liftoff at 6:10 p.m. Central Time, 5:10 a.m. here in Baikonur on Friday. Temperatures are chilly, hovering right around the freezing mark. NASA's Scott Kelly is seated in the right seat of the Soyuz, ready after years of training to become the first space shuttle commander to launch atop a Soyuz rocket. Next spring, he'll return to Earth in the same Soyuz vehicle, the second shuttle commander to do so. Ken Bowersox was the first in May of 2003 at the conclusion of Expedition 6. The flight of the Soyuz will be monitored through a series of Russian tracking stations that stretch from here in Baikonur east to the city of Vladivostok. Telemetry from the new Soyuz spacecraft will be relayed to the Mission Control Center in the town of Korolyov outside Moscow, where Russian flight controllers will take over mission authority once the Soyuz is safely in orbit. NASA is represented in Baikonur today, among others, by Bill Gerstenmaier, the Associate Administrator for Space Operations, Mike Suffredini, the International Space Station Program Manager, the Deputy Director of the Johnson Space Center, Ellen Ochoa, and Scott Kelly's twin brother, Mark Kelly. Next February, Mark Kelly and his crewmates will climb aboard the Shuttle Endeavour on Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center for their launch to the International Space Station, which at that time will be commanded by Scott Kelly. The first-time relatives, let alone twin brothers, will meet each other in space and as respective vehicle commanders. We're just 6 months shy of the 50th anniversary of the launch of Yuri Gagarin as the first human in space from the same launch pad that Kelly, and Skripochka are on at this hour, strapped into the descent module of the Soyuz TMA-01M. It is fully fueled, ready for launch to continue the legacy left behind by Gagarin a half-century ago. That's it for now from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Now back to you at Mission Control in Houston.
The crew was awakened at about 9:40 Central Time this morning, about 8.5 hours prior to launch. The crew members then participated in final traditional and required pre-launch activities. That again was a look at the remaining members of the Expedition 25 crew, now less than 10 minutes or away from their launch, about 8.5 minutes actually. Official launch time is 6:10 p.m. Central Time, or 5:10 a.m. Friday morning in Baikonur. A short time ago, commands were sent to switch power from ground sources to the Soyuz onboard batteries as the countdown moves along with no issues reported. After reaching orbit, the Soyuz command and control systems will be activated and stored. Computer commands will deploy navigation and communications antennas. The first will be the Kurs antenna and Kurs rendezvous and docking antenna, which will be used to provide automatic range and rate of closure information on the final approach to the Soyuz to its docking with the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Zvezda service module. And within seconds of reaching orbit, the spacecraft's solar arrays will be deployed to collect power for use by the onboard batteries to generate electricity for the Soyuz systems. About 90 minutes into the mission, the crew will oversee the programmed activation sequence of a variety of systems as the spacecraft makes its first pass over Russian ground stations. Those systems include the spacecraft's power supply system, its radio communication system, and the critical motion control system. Several rendezvous maneuvers will also be executed later today and tomorrow as the Soyuz fine-tunes its path to the International Space Station. On the launch pad at Baikonur, the countdown is proceeding on schedule. Now just 7 minutes from launch of the Soyuz rocket.
Okay, L-1 minute, everything is on schedule. Copy. We're ready for launch.
At this point in the countdown, the Soyuz first stage steering jets are in the ready-to-launch position, and ground commands have been received from the rocket, indicating that all primary and backup systems are ready for launch, as you just heard there.
We'll continue to be stable. And unfortunately, we had to ask you to help us out a little bit more than usual, but hopefully everything will continue to go smoothly. Okay, we copy. Right, and we will try to analyze the situation and see what happened, but you just don't worry about anything and continue to work as you have been trained. We copy, will do. Launch sequence initiated.
View here of flight engineers Alexander Cleary and Oleg Skropochka. 5 minutes and 30 seconds now away from launch. Launch control reports that the range at Baikonur is clear and the Soyuz rocket is ready to begin its journey. At the T-minus 5 minute mark now, onboard systems switch to onboard control. Soyuz Commander Alexander Cleary's cockpit displays and controls have been activated. Crew members will be closing their helmets, which puts them on suit oxygen, and the launch key will be inserted in launch bunker ready for launch.
$16.3 in Gulam. Go ahead. I'm still not seeing the parameters that I mentioned earlier on INPU 2. All parameters are still displayed on INPU 1. I will wait for after liftoff to discuss this. Copy all and concur.
4 minutes to launch now. Three minutes and 30 seconds to launch. Nitrogen purge of engine combustion chambers.
Draining initiated. We copy, and we're feeling slight vibration. Draining in progress.
T-minus 3 minutes now.
Venting in progress. Repress.
Just 2 minutes and 30 seconds now until launch. The booster tank is being pressurized for flight. Two minutes left in the countdown. All systems still go for launch. Just 1 minute to launch now. The Soyuz is on internal power. Automatic launch sequencers have been activated, and the first umbilical tower will be separating from the booster. We're now less than a minute away from the launch of the 25th expedition crew to the International Space Station. There's that first umbilical tower.
We copy, and we're experiencing vibration.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. Second umbilical tower moving away from the Soyuz. First stage engines should be at flight speed. 3, 2, 1. Fueling tower separates and booster ignition. And liftoff. Liftoff of the Soyuz rocket as Alexander Kaleri, Scott Kelly, and Oleg Skropochka begin their journey to the International Space Station.
And we're feeling the vibrations. We feel great. Everything's in order on board. Copy.
Everything going well. Good pitch program. And Soyuz is heading toward a link-up with the International Space Station 2 days from now.
1 and 2 are operating nominally. 30 seconds of flight. We still feel good. And we are experiencing slight vibration and starting to experience G-force. Copy.
Good first stage performance. Soyuz delivering 102 tons of thrust from its 4 boosters and single engine. The first stage of the Soyuz measured 68 feet in length and 2 feet in diameter, burning liquid fuel for the first 2 minutes and 6 seconds of the flight.
Is nominal. Copy. We feel fine. G-forces are increasing. Copy. 60 seconds into your flight. Pitch, yaw, and roll are all nominal. "80 seconds of flight. All systems are nominal." Thrusters of stages 1 and 2 are operating nominally. And we feel fine. "110 seconds into the flight."
Coming up on the 2-minute mark, a jettison of 4 strap-on boosters. These have completed their jobs and will drop away at an altitude of 28 statute miles. Soyuz is traveling at about 3,350 miles an hour.
Your flight. The vehicle is stable. And we feel fine. Everything's great on board. Copy. "150 seconds. Second stage thrusters are nominal. Shroud has been jettisoned. We copy and concur.
Escape tower and launch shroud jettisons, as you just heard there. That happens at the 2-minute and 40-second mark.
And as usual, we're experiencing flight bias and roll. Copy. 190 seconds into your flight. Parameters are all nominal.
Over 3 minutes now, traveling at a speed of about 4,700 miles an hour.
200 seconds into the flight. Second stage thrusters are nominal. Copy. We all feel fine and everything's in order on board.
Soyuz core stage is performing as advertised. The core stage of the Soyuz is 56 feet in length, 13.5 feet in diameter, with a single engine of four fuel chambers, providing 96 tons of thrust for its 3 minutes and 28 seconds of operation.
Into the flight. The vehicle is stable. Copy, and we're doing well. "250 seconds. Pitch, yaw, and roll are all nominal. Everything's in order on board. The G-force still rising, and we're experiencing some growing G-forces as we keep going. Copy. "290 seconds into the flight. Separation of second stage."
Second stage separation there. The core stage engines now fulfilled their role for today and dropping away. About 4 minutes of powered flight remaining. Soyuz now being propelled by single engine of the Soyuz third stage. This engine is providing 30 tons of thrust and will burn for 4 minutes and 2 seconds.
Stage 3 is operating nominally, very smoothly, no vibration. Copy. Third stage thruster is operating nominally.
Continuing to get views inside the capsule as the crew continues to make its way towards orbit.
160 seconds of flight. Pitch, roll, and yaw are all nominal.
Everything continuing as planned.
We copy all. Mission control, everything's in order on board. G-forces are continuing to grow. ...390 seconds into the flight. The vehicle as well as launcher parameters are all nominal. Copy, and we're doing well on board.
We're hearing translated status reports. Again, reporting that all is continuing as planned for today's launch.
...430 seconds into the flight.
Now more than 7 minutes into the flight. Velocity now almost 13,500 miles an hour.
Reading you okay, but we hear increasing noise on the loop. Nguli, this is Mr. Permanov. This is it for me. I wish you all the best. Good job. And we're almost out of coverage. How do you read me? Over. We copy all. Thank you very much for your kind words. We will try to do our best to complete all of the objectives of everything that's been assigned to us.
Anatoly Permanov there, head of Roscosmos and the Russian State Commission of top space managers, wishing the crew luck once again.
Motion control system parameters are all nominal.
Once the third stage delivers the Soyuz to orbit and the module is separated, a series of pre-programmed commands will be executed to prepare the Soyuz for orbital operations.
500 seconds into the flight. Flight is nominal.
These stored commands, called time tag commands, allow many of the Soyuz systems to be automatically activated by onboard computers at precise times stored in those computers.
Things are still good on board. 520 seconds into the flight.
Now just under 9 minutes into today's flight.
.530 seconds. Stage 3 separation confirmed.
Third stage cutoff and separation. The single liquid fuel engine is shut down and dropped away at an altitude of about 125 statute miles.
Over to Mission Control Moscow.
Third stage is performing an avoidance maneuver by opening a valve in its liquid oxygen tank.
Separation, thanks, guys. Nguli, this is Mission Control Moscow. How do you read? We have you loud and clear, Moscow. Nguli, Moscow. We have you loud and clear. Please make sure and write down that during the leak checks, you do not need to close RPV-1. Actually, do not close RPV-1. How copy? We copy. We already closed it. Should we reopen it? No, don't worry about opening it. RPV-1. Copy. RPV-1 open. We will perform measurement 1 at this time.
Now 11 minutes into today's flight, the Soyuz capsule and crew inside are safely in orbit, and the spacecraft is automatically executing its pre-programmed commands to deploy the antennas and solar arrays.
Moscow reporting. Ngul 2 reporting. First measurement, 11, 8, 25, 12, 8, 55, and 8:52. Copy.
Continuing to see live views inside the capsule of Alexander Kaleri and Oleg Skropochka. Now 12 minutes into their flight, launching today at 6:10 p.m. Central Time. Soyuz is now orbiting at an altitude of about 143 miles by 118 miles. That orbit will be raised systematically over the course of the next 2 days, placing it in close proximity to the International Space Station for the final rendezvous and docking set for 7:02 p.m. Central Time on Saturday. Control of the spacecraft from here on out will be overseen from the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolev outside of Moscow.
Ingula, Mission Control Moscow. Ingula, Mission Control Moscow. Go ahead for Ingula.
Посмотрите статус миссии у вас на INPO-1 и INPO-2 в левом нижнем углу.
Could you look at the lower left
На INPO-1 статус полет.
Field on INPO 1 and 2. What does it say? On INPO 1 it says status mission. On INPO 2 it says parachuting. Okay. 18 3 parameter 20 07 21 21 22 319 322 17.9 25 17.7 parameter 26 227. Copy. How are you feeling? We're feeling good. Copy.
Crew continuing to report that everything's going well since their launch about 14 minutes ago from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Now on their way to the International Space Station, and in about 3 hours and 40 minutes we'll be performing the first of the burns that's going to begin putting them on course for the International Space Station. That's coming up at 9:51 p.m. Central Time, and will be followed by a second at 10:19 p.m. Then there will be one last burn scheduled for 6:48 p.m. on Friday.
Operations. Okay, display 1. Operations. And then select line Techn. Okay, selected operations display. Now SPS. Okay, SPS button 1. That's affirm. Okay, SPS display has been selected.
Приведение в исходное. Нажмите на формате.
Reconfiguring back to nominal config. If you could press that on the display.
На самом формате есть кнопка.
On display itself, there is a button, Restore Initial Config. Go ahead and press it. Moscow, Inguli, how do you read? Loud and clear, how us?
Inguli, как слышите нас?
Inguli, how do you read? This is Mission Control Moscow. Mission Control Moscow, Inguli, how do you read? 2 millimeters. We'll have you loud and clear, Inguli. How do you read us? Inguli, this is Mission Control Moscow. Inguli, how do you read? We have you very weak.
Inguli,
Inguli, on display SPS. There is a button called Restore Initial Config. Copy. On input 2, SPS display, press Restore Initial Config button. Yes, that's affirmed. Please go ahead and press the button. I'm sorry, say that again, Mission Control. Yes, please press button, Restore Initial Config. Copy, in work.
Teams here on the ground reporting, are communicating with the Soyuz capsule, calling it Ingul, as you've been hearing. That's the name of a powerful river in southern Ukraine, and it's a call sign chosen by Soyuz Commander Alexander Kaleri.
Initial config is eliminated, and mission status is mission or flight.
Kaleri used the same call sign when he launched aboard the Soyuz TMA-3 as Expedition 8 flight engineer 7 years ago this month.
This is the measurements after 5 minutes in SM.
Again, the crew is now well on their way to the International Space Station. That, in addition to Alexander Kaleri, includes Oleg Skropochka and NASA astronaut Scott Kelly. They're scheduled to actually reach the International Space Station at 7:02 p.m. Central Time on Saturday. They'll actually begin their rendezvous work at about 4:40 p.m. Central Time on Saturday, with the Kurz antennas that will lead them into the station being activated just before 5:30 p.m. Central, and their final approach actually starting at 6:51 p.m. Central.
Ingul Mission Control Moscow. Go ahead, we have you loud and clear. You're on orbit, and all of the structural components have been deployed. You go to open the pressure helmet and loosen your restraints, and the altitude is 259. We copy orbital parameters, and we'll also go to loosen the shoulder straps, as well as open the pressure helmets. And the activation of thermal sensors is at scheduled time. That is a good readback. Guys, this is Mr. Solovyev. Congratulations to you on a successful ascent to orbit. Everything looks nominal. We're going to analyze the issues you've been having during pre-launch operations. Otherwise, everything looks great. Have a good flight, and we'll talk to you again in a couple of days. Thank you very much, Vladimir Alexeyevich. We'll talk to you soon. Guys, the next Compass AOS is at 034200. Prior to that time, please make sure you activate Compass.
Liftoff. The Russian rocket left the launch pad in the early hours of the morning in Kazakhstan. It's safely in orbit now, on its way to dock with the International Space Station. Now, there is 1 U.S. and 2 Russian cosmonauts on board. The craft is going to spend the next couple of days chasing the station as they both orbit the Earth. The men will be living on board the station for the next 5 months.
Breakthrough to the men by Saturday.
We are advancing pretty well in the Plan B. We restart the drilling process, and we are hoping that we can get contact more or less this Saturday, depending if whether we have to do a change in the hammer or not. Could be a little bit earlier, but we are projecting this date for Saturday.
Now, that would be a milestone, but it would not be the end of the miners' wait. Now, engineers could take days to galvanize the rescue shaft, but the arrival of the drill should at least galvanize spirits. Now, the so-called Plan B drill is now some 60 meters from the miners. Its progress has exceeded expectations, and the man behind the operation has spoken exclusively to CNN's Patrick Altman.
Do you always think that you guys would be the ones to pull this off?
I've felt since we've been here we've had a good chance of it. I mean, it's just you can't predict the downtimes, the breakages, the formation issues. I felt since we got here that as long as we had some luck on our side that we would have a real good chance of poking through first.
How much do you think about the families, the men below who you're trying to reach?
Well, we think about them quite often. I mean, especially whenever things are tough and you're worried or you're in a situation where things aren't going real well, and that quickly sets you to where you need to be. You look down at your feet and realize 2,000 feet below us, there's 33 guys that are in a whole hell of a lot worse situation than we are.
Now, assuming that Saturday's target is reached, the time frame for rescue is rather more dubious. Getting the miners out cannot begin until engineers make a decision on encasing the shaft. Carl Penhall joins me live from the site of the mine near Copiapo. And Carl, how realistic is it that the miners will be reached on Saturday? And given the quick pace of everything, is the operation being rushed?
Well, a lot of this is down to fine-tuning now because we are coming down to the wire. And if you look and listen closely to what the Mines Minister said yesterday, he said he expected breakthrough Saturday. He said if all goes well, things could become even a little earlier. Now, we did know from that mid-afternoon yesterday there was about 75 meters to go to reach the tunnel, and technically that drill could be through by sometime today. But they're giving us these time frames just in case they need to change the drill bits or if any other technicalities arrive. But then, as you say, that's just the beginning of the end. Once breakthrough comes, they have to encase all part of that rescue shaft, which at that point in the ground is going to be 624 meters long. Now, if they opt for only encasing the first 100 meters or so of that rescue shaft, they could do that in a day or 2 days. There's also some time to put in cameras to test the integrity of that rescue shaft to make sure there are no rock falls. But this is all certainly feasible now, the first point breakthrough, and then after that the miners could be home anything between 2 and 8 days after that, Christy.
Okay, and do we know which of the 33 miners will be leaving the mine first through that rescue shaft, and who would be leaving last, and how are they making that decision?
That certainly is the subject of fierce debate here on the surface. I bet if you ask those 33 miners down there, though, they probably won't care what order they leave that mine as long as they leave. But up here on the surface, what they've said is that the plan is to get the fittest miners out first, as long as they have some technical knowledge as well. The idea is to get the fit guys with technical knowledge out first so they can give feedback to the rescue operation itself, saying this is happening, that's happening, commenting feedback on any problems maybe with the rescue capsule, that kind of stuff. And then the next group of people that will come, panic attacks, anybody that has suffered any physical problems, although we're told that all are in good shape right now, and the fittest of the fit will be the ones that last come up. That, according to the medics on the surface. Talking to the families, the letters that they've received from the miners, it could be that the miners have other ideas, and the thought is that maybe the shift foreman, Luis Ursua, will be the last man up the shaft, and that really, a bit like a captain on a sinking ship, maybe the shift foreman will be the last one to come out of the collapsed mine, Christy.
It's incredible just thinking about the drama that's going to be unfolding in this next week. And we know, again, that the drills will reach the miners by tomorrow. How are the families at the surface reacting to the pace of the operation? How are they preparing themselves?
Well, that, of course, and I was talking around one of the campfires that spring up here in Camp Hope every night, talking to family members last night, and they say that this has been an accident that has affected our loved ones, our husbands, our brothers down in that mine, but it's affected us here. One lady, I said, what really does it mean to wait for 62 nights and days? And she said, I feel it's like a bad itch. It's a bad itch that's bothering you every minute of every day. She says, my stomach hurts. She says, my head hurts. She says, sometimes I feel like I'm in a dream. But she says, when I wake up, this is still reality and there's nothing more to do but just to go on waiting day in, day out. But they certainly feel that the beginning of the end is here, and that has given them a lift in spirits. Another lady I talked to said, you know, when I get my husband out of that hole, I just want to take home and I want to forget that any of this ever happened, Christy.
Sie fliegen mit einer Sojus-Kapsel, die zum ersten Mal mit digitaler Steuerungstechnik ausgestattet ist. 5 Monate lang werden sie auf der ISS bleiben. Eigentlich sollten sie noch in diesem Jahr Verstärkung bekommen, aber der nächste Start, der wird sich verzögern. Denn beim Transport nach Baikonur wurde die Raumkapsel dafür beschädigt.
53 Jahre ist Paolo Nespoli alt, ein Astronaut aus Italien. Und das ist das Besondere, nach mehr als 2 Jahren darf mal wieder ein Europäer auf Langzeitmission zur ISS. Und während darüber geredet wird, rast die gerade über den Pazifik mit 28.000 Kilometern in der Stunde. Die Kollegen an Bord merken davon natürlich nichts. Sie warten auf die 2 Russen und den Amerikaner, die vergangene Nacht von Baikonur aus gestartet sind. Auf Nespoli werden sie den neuesten Nachrichten zufolge länger als geplant warten müssen. Mindestens 10 Tage wird er sich verspäten, weil seine Sojus-Kapsel beim Transport beschädigt wurde. Am Job Nespolis auf der ISS ändert das aber nichts. 30 Experimente stehen an und er selbst ist das perfekte Versuchskaninchen. So löst sich etwa sein Skelett in der Schwerelosigkeit langsam auf. Indem man die gesunden Astronauten untersucht, die im All plötzlich genau die gleichen Symptome wie Osteoporose-Patienten zeigen, kann man versuchen, die Mechanismen zu verstehen, die diese Krankheit auslösen, wie man sie stoppen kann und das dann auf der Erde nutzt. Die ISS ist mittlerweile über dem Indischen Ozean angekommen und Nespoli hat es nicht eilig. Er war ja schon einmal für ein paar Tage oben und 6 Monate liegen nun vor ihm.
Believe it or not, 1 in 5 British school children believe it was the spaceman from the Disney movie Toy Story. A poll of 2,000 kids in the UK discovered they know a lot about celebrities, but about real history, not so much. For example, a significant percentage answered correctly that it was indeed Armstrong who made the first lunar landing. They called him Lance, the Tour de France champion, not Neil, the astronaut.